A storm brews over the endless Egyptian desert, rolling in like a dark tidal wave swallowing the horizon. The air is electric, vibrating with a tension that feels older than the sand itself. As the wind lashes against abandoned dunes, the night seems to pulse, alive, waiting, remembering. A single bolt of lightning tears open the sky, illuminating a patch of land that should have been nothing but emptiness. Instead, something stirs beneath the shifting sands, as if the desert has exhaled after holding its breath for 1,000 years. For a heartbeat, a faint geometric outline glints beneath the dust. A buried stone structure, fractured by time but unmistakably crafted by human hands. The storm uncovers just enough of it to whisper, "Look again." And then the sands shift back, covering it as though the desert regrets revealing its secret too soon. Centuries later, a lone chronicler would write of this place without ever naming it, speaking of a forbidden vault where men once touched the first memory of the world. His ink trembled on the page as if he feared the parchment itself might ignite. He never said who opened the chamber. He never dared to describe what was found inside. But he wrote one line that would outlive him. Those who descended did not return unchanged. The story begins not in our time, but in an age of faith, fury, and fractured kingdoms. It begins with a brotherhood that walked through history like a blade cutting through silk, the Knights Templar. Warriors shaped by prophecy, bound by vows they barely understood, and feared by kings who sensed their loyalty was not truly to the crown nor the church, but to something deeper, something older. Imagine the desert centuries earlier, beneath another storm. Picture a group of cloaked riders carving their way through darkness, torches flickering against the wind. Their white mantles, slashed with the red cross of martyrdom, are half hidden beneath travel-worn cloaks. These are not crusaders marching to battle. They are not pilgrims seeking salvation. They are men moving with purpose, silent, urgent, sworn to a mission no scripture ever mentioned. One of them clutches a leather packet beneath his cloak, as though guarding a newborn child. Inside lies a fragment of a map, faded ink, unfamiliar symbols, and a single line written in Latin that scholars would later argue about for centuries. Ad portam veterum regum. To the gate of the old kings. No official Templar chronicle mentions this night. No papal record acknowledges their presence in Egypt. And yet whispers remain, scattered through forbidden manuscripts and marginal notes. The Templars came here not for conquest, but for knowledge. Knowledge buried long before their faith existed. The sandstorm hisses around them, an ancient warning. But the knights press on, guided by a star chart so bizarrely accurate it seems decades ahead of its time. They dismount near the base of a forgotten ruin, nothing like the grandeur of Giza or the towering pride of Luxor. This place is humble, broken, almost ashamed to exist. But the men gather in reverence as though standing before a cathedral. One kneels and wipes the sand from a slab of stone, revealing markings not entirely Egyptian. They are emerging lines, symbols, and letters that do not belong together, as if carved by someone trying to reconcile two worlds. The leader of the group whispers a prayer, but even he seems unsure to whom he prays. A tremor runs beneath their boots. Not natural, not wind. The earth shifts just enough to expose the faint edge of a buried doorway. Not a tomb entrance, not a temple gate. Something narrower, deeper, deliberately concealed. The knights exchange glances. Fear, excitement, doubt. Lightning flashes again, illuminating the plains around them. In that split second, they see shapes in the distance, human silhouettes standing perfectly still, watching. Guardians or illusions of the storm. No one speaks of them. Silence becomes their shield. With great effort, they push aside the sand-covered stone, revealing darkness so absolute it seems to swallow the torchlight. The air that escapes is icy, impossible in the desert night, carrying a scent like damp stone and something faintly metallic, almost like blood. One knight jerks back, insisting the place is cursed. Another argues it must be preserved for Christendom. But the leader, voice steady despite the tremor in his hand, declares that their journey has led them here and nowhere else. They descend. Step by step, the world above disappears. The storm's howl fades. The desert's breath stops. All that remains is the sound of boots against ancient stone and the low hum, so faint it's barely perceptible, echoing through the hidden passageway. It is not wind, and it is not the sound of the knights themselves. It is something deeper, something alive. Far below the surface, their torches flicker violently, reacting to the presence of a vast chamber opening before them. They stop, stunned at what the flames reveal. Smooth black walls, perfectly cut surfaces, angles that make no architectural sense for a structure supposedly thousands of years old. A space that looks engineered. At the center of the chamber stands a stone pedestal holding an object that seems to drink in the light instead of reflecting it. A shape undefined by the torch glow, yet undeniably present. One knight gasps and crosses himself. Another drops to his knees. The leader steps forward, hand trembling as he lifts the torch higher. But the light bends strangely around the object, as if the thing rejects illumination, as if it was never meant to be seen. He whispers, "This is not of man." In that moment, thunder cracks above, shaking the earth as though the storm has sensed their trespass. The chamber vibrates, dust falls. Somewhere above, the desert groans like a wounded beast, and the Templars realize, too late, that their discovery is not simply archaeological. It is forbidden, something sealed away by hands long vanished, left in darkness for reasons they cannot yet comprehend. Something that, if revealed to the world above, could fracture everything: faith, history, identity. They do not yet understand what they have found. But history will remember this moment. History will remember that beneath the sands of Egypt, on a night when the desert whispered, the Knights Templar uncovered something so dangerous. It would follow them for centuries and destroy them from within. And the world has been trying to forget it ever since. The young knights who would one day be feared as the Knights Templar were not born into legend. They were born into a world trembling under the weight of holy war, famine, and prophecy. Before the Red Cross marked their tunics, before the world whispered their name with awe and suspicion, they were simply men, uncertain, restless, shaped by stories older than their swords. The world they inherited was fractured, a battlefield of faiths, kingdoms, and forgotten gods that still haunted the stones of every ancient land. Europe in the late 11th century was a continent brimming with fear and revelation. Rumors of the apocalypse swirled through monasteries. Comets streaked across the sky, interpreted as divine warnings. And beneath this trembling surface, the church prepared itself for something monumental. A holy awakening, a spiritual cleansing, a war that would carve a new world from the old. The First Crusade did not begin with armies. It began with visions, whispers, and a sense that destiny itself was shifting. Into this world stepped a group of young men who believed they had been chosen for something greater than battle. They had grown up hearing tales of relics that glowed in the presence of sin, of ancient prophets who knew the names of stars, of sacred objects hidden in the farthest corners of the earth. These stories shaped them more than scripture ever could. They saw themselves not merely as soldiers of Christ, but as seekers, pilgrims chasing a truth buried beneath layers of time, myth, and fear. Before they ever set foot in Jerusalem, their minds were already turning toward mysteries that the church refused to discuss. The collapse of old empires had left behind ruins filled with symbols no one could translate. Desert caravans brought strange artifacts into Europe, amulets inscribed with geometric lines, scroll fragments written in languages that felt foreign even to scholars. Some knights collected these objects in secret, drawn to an unnamed hunger they could not explain. They sensed that the world was older, stranger, and more interconnected than priests dared to admit. It was during this time that a quiet belief began to spread among those who would become the earliest Templars. They whispered that the crusade was not only about reclaiming the Holy Land, it was about uncovering something hidden beneath it, something left behind by a civilization that vanished long before Moses walked the deserts, something powerful enough to shift the balance of the world. These whispers were dismissed by the church as youthful nonsense, but inside the hearts of the future Templars, they grew roots. Their journey to the Holy Land was marked not only by bloodshed but by moments of unsettling revelation. As they marched across Byzantine roads and desert trails, they encountered ruins that made no sense. Massive stones cut with impossible precision, pillars carved with symbols that seemed to merge distinct cultures. One knight reportedly found a shard of obsidian etched with both Egyptian hieroglyphs and Proto-Hebrew letters. Another wrote in his journal that he dreamt of a black chamber lit by no fire, though he had never seen such a thing. By the time the Crusaders reached Jerusalem, these young men felt as though invisible hands were guiding them. They witnessed miracles and horrors, victories and tragedies, but something deeper gnawed at their souls. They noticed that certain relic traders avoided the bustling markets and instead whispered about objects not meant for common eyes. They learned of tombs sealed not out of respect, but out of fear, and they began to realize that the Holy Land was not merely a battlefield. It was a crossroads of ancient knowledge, where the secrets of older civilizations converged. Their order, when it finally took shape, would be built not only on vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but on a fourth vow whispered only to the most devoted: seek what was left in shadow. This vow was never officially recorded, never spoken aloud in church, but it was etched into the hearts of the men who formed the earliest nucleus of the Knights Templar. They believed God's truth was too vast to be contained in Scripture alone. They believed creation held clues waiting to be rediscovered, and they believed they were chosen to find them. Fear, however, followed close behind their curiosity. Not fear of enemies, nor of death, but fear of what they might uncover. There was an unease growing among the monks and scholars who traveled with the early knights, a worry that the Templars were beginning to interpret their mission in ways the Church did not authorize. Some chroniclers hinted that these men prayed differently, studied differently, questioned theology with unusual boldness. A few even suggested that they had encountered something in their early campaigns that changed them forever. One evening, as the first small brotherhood sat in a candlelit chamber in Jerusalem, one knight confided in another that he felt as though the world beneath our feet cries out with truths too ancient for our minds. Another replied that during a skirmish near Gaza, he had seen symbols carved into a wall that matched the markings on an artifact brought from Egypt by a trader fleeing famine. The coincidences were too many, the patterns too deliberate. These men began to see themselves as part of something older than the crusade itself. Their transformation did not go unnoticed. Priests spoke of their intense gazes, their sleepless nights, their growing detachment from worldly concerns. Some knights began collecting fragments of maps that led not east toward Persia, but south, toward the deserts of Sinai and Egypt. They studied ancient astronomical charts that seemed far more precise than medieval science should allow. They translated forgotten myths about objects of power hidden beneath stone kingdoms. And yet, despite their rising reputation as protectors of pilgrims and warriors of Christendom, there was a restlessness inside them. They sensed that Jerusalem was not the final destination. It was merely the doorway. A rumor circulated among the early Templars, never written, always spoken with caution, that the Ark of the Covenant had once been taken not north, but south. That prophets had crossed the desert not to flee, but to hide something. That Egypt, land of forgotten gods and buried memory, held a secret that both Moses and the pharaohs had sought. This rumor might have died like countless others. But one night, an exhausted courier arrived from Alexandria carrying a scroll that changed everything. A scroll describing a vault where the first light of creation was hidden from the eyes of man. A vault sealed beneath shifting sands. A vault protected by generations who had forgotten even their own names. The scroll was handed to men who would eventually call themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ. And they understood, even then, that their path would not end in Jerusalem. It would lead them deeper, into deserts, into forgotten chambers, into truths the Church had no scripture for, into secrets older than their faith. They did not yet know it, but Egypt was already waiting for them, waiting with a truth powerful enough to reshape their destiny, and eventually to seal their doom. The map looked innocent at first glance, just another medieval chart sketched on calfskin, its edges darkened by time and travel. But anyone who knew cartography of the Crusader age could see immediately that something was wrong. Or rather, something was impossible. Medieval maps were crude, symbolic things. Distorted coastlines, exaggerated holy sites, oceans drawn like swirling beasts. But this one was precise, almost unnervingly so. It showed the Holy Land not as pilgrims imagined it, but as though the mapmaker had stood in the sky and seen the earth from above. Jerusalem sat in the center, not as a spiritual metaphor, but as a geometric anchor point. Perfect lines radiated from it, straight, unwavering, measured with a mathematical confidence no medieval scholar should possess. One line pointed east toward the Dead Sea. Another stretched north toward Antioch. But the third line, the longest, angled southward in a way that defied every known route of the time. It cut through the Sinai Peninsula with unwavering intention and ended in a blank patch of canvas where no city, no temple, no known landmark should be. Beneath that southern endpoint was a single symbol, a triangle enclosing a circle. Beneath the symbol, written in a hand that did not match the rest of the map, were 4 Latin words: Linea ad occultum sacrarium, the line to the hidden sanctuary. Scholars who later examined fragments of this chart called it an odd curiosity, a mystical or allegorical piece. But to the early Templars, who already sensed they were being guided by forces older than their order, it was something far more significant. They believed this map represented not faith, but knowledge. Forbidden knowledge. Some claimed the map originated from a mysterious traveler who arrived in Jerusalem speaking a dialect no one fully recognized. Others insisted it came from a group of monks who had fled Alexandria during a violent uprising and sought refuge with the Templars. None of these accounts were ever verified. And perhaps that was intentional. The map's true origin may have been too dangerous to acknowledge openly. What set this map apart were not just its lines, but the symbols decorating its corners. In the top right, a cluster of tiny stars arranged in a pattern that did not match any medieval constellation charts. In the bottom left, symbols resembling early Proto-Hebrew script, but altered in ways that seemed deliberate, coded. And in the bottom right, an unmistakable carving. The Egyptian was scepter, a symbol of power and dominion, placed illegibly among Christian markings. Cultures separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles appeared merged on a single piece of parchment. A few Templar knights studied the map night after night, tracing its lines, searching for hidden meanings. They noticed that the southern path matched no known pilgrimage route. It avoided cities, fortresses, and caravan roads. It crossed empty terrain with such smooth precision that it felt less like a journey of men and more like a directional key, one pointing to something the mapmaker knew was there. On one evening, Brother Giroux, a Templar known for his sharp memory and uncanny sense of geography, made a discovery that startled the entire group. The 3 lines from Jerusalem formed a perfect geometric triangle. Not roughly, not approximately, perfectly. The angle measurements, when compared with astronomical distances, revealed a pattern that mirrored a layout the Templars had seen carved into the walls of an old Egyptian ruin during the First Crusade. The same triangle, the same orientation, the same proportions. It was as if someone centuries earlier had mapped out a triad of sacred sites spanning 3 nations, connected by a knowledge that neither Hebrews, Christians, nor the Egyptians should have shared. Word of this mysterious chart spread quietly among the Templar ranks. Some dismissed it as coincidence. Others believed it was the key to a relic older than the Ark of the Covenant, older than the pyramids, perhaps older than recorded time itself. A relic that had been hidden, buried deliberately, beneath the sands of Egypt. But intrigue turned into obsession when another clue surfaced. A thin strip of parchment hidden behind the map's backing. On it was drawn a symbol known to only a handful of scholars at the time. A star chart that matched the alignment of Sirius, Orion's belt, and Regulus, but arranged in a pattern that hadn't appeared in the sky for thousands of years. A precessional alignment. Ancient. Prehistoric. The Templars who saw this understood immediately. The map wasn't guiding them towards something built in their age. It was guiding them towards something ancient, something that predated the Christ they served, something placed in Egypt long before kingdoms rose or scriptures were written. The southern line of the map was not a route. It was a compass alignment. Following it meant stepping into a part of history untouched by Christian, Jewish or Islamic narratives, a realm of forgotten kings, lost priesthoods, and secrets buried so deeply that even the desert seemed to guard them with silent hostility. One elderly monk studying the chart whispered a warning that chilled the younger knights. Maps do not lie, but they do not excuse those who follow them blindly. This one points toward truth no faith is ready for. His words were ignored. The Templars were young, curious, unafraid. They convinced themselves that if God had allowed them to find this map, then God must have intended them to follow it. But as they prepared to journey south, a strange unease settled over the order. Horses refused to tread near the southern road. A torch left beside the map reportedly flickered violently as if reacting to something unseen. And one knight, known for his prophetic dreams, claimed he saw a vision of a stone chamber beneath sand so deep it whispered the names of men long dead. Still, they pressed on. For the Templars, this map was not merely a coincidence. It was a summons toward a secret hidden beneath Egypt's sands, one that would lure them into a mystery powerful enough to reshape their purpose, haunt their order, and eventually help bring about their destruction. They did not yet know it, but the lines on this impossible map were already leading them toward a chamber older than any scripture, and a truth no knight was prepared to face. The search for hidden order in the universe often begins with an unsettling realization. What we see is only a fraction of what exists. Human perception is tailored for survival, not for understanding reality in its fullness. Our eyes capture a narrow slice of the electromagnetic spectrum. Our ears detect only a small window of sound, and our minds filter out everything that does not immediately serve us. The cosmos, however, operates far beyond these boundaries, weaving together forces and structures that remain invisible yet shape the fate of every star, every galaxy, and every atom. As scientific tools sharpen and theoretical frameworks expand, a deeper architecture begins to emerge, one that suggests the universe is not a random explosion of matter, but a carefully tuned environment governed by mathematical precision and interconnected laws. This realization pushes us toward a profound question. Is the universe fine-tuned, or are we only now learning the language in which it is written? The more scientists explore, the more striking the patterns become. From the stable orbit of electrons around nuclei to the delicate balance of cosmic expansion, everything appears to float between extremes. Too hot or too cold, too dense or too empty, too fast or too slow. If the gravitational constant were adjusted by even the tiniest fraction, galaxies would never have formed. If the strong nuclear force were slightly weaker, atoms would collapse. If dark energy were marginally stronger, space would expand so rapidly that stars could never ignite. It is as if the universe exists on a razor's edge, poised in a narrow band where complexity can emerge, consciousness can evolve, and stories like ours can unfold. These coincidences pile up like clues in a cosmic detective case, hinting that the universe's parameters are not merely accidental, but interdependent, threads of a single fabric woven with almost impossible precision. As this picture sharpens, another layer of mystery begins to surface. The possibility that the physical laws themselves are not fixed. Instead, they may shift, evolve, or emerge from deeper symmetries that remain hidden beneath the observable world. Quantum fields ripple with information that behaves like code, suggesting that particles are not fundamental objects but excitations of a deeper informational substrate. Space-time, once thought to be the stage on which reality unfolds, now appears flexible, dynamic, and possibly emergent, more like a hologram projected from unseen dimensions than a solid backdrop. This challenges classical intuition and forces a re-examination of what real even means. If space and time are not fundamental, then the universe might be built from relationships, interactions, and information rather than objects. This leads naturally to the most provocative idea of all, that consciousness itself may not be an accident of biology, but part of the same structure that shapes the universe. Some physicists propose that observation plays a role in collapsing quantum possibilities into actual events. Others explore the idea that awareness arises from the way the brain interacts with the underlying mathematical fabric of reality. If consciousness is entangled with the laws of physics, then the universe may be far stranger than we ever imagined. perhaps more like a vast network of interconnected processes than a machine made of physical parts. This perspective places humans not as passive observers but as participants in the ongoing creation of reality, woven into the same tapestry as galaxies and quasars. Yet the more answers science uncovers, the deeper the questions become. Every discovery reveals another layer of complexity behind it. Dark matter outlines the invisible skeleton of the cosmos, holding galaxies in place, yet no one knows what it truly is. Dark energy drives the expansion of the universe with silent insistence, yet its nature remains unknown. The quantum vacuum seethes with energy that should rip space apart, yet somehow it doesn't. These contradictions suggest that our current understanding is only the first draft of a much larger story. A story in which the laws we take for granted might be local rules within a greater cosmic ecosystem, shaped by principles we have yet to imagine. Through all of this, a pattern emerges, not of chaos, but of underlying coherence. Whether the universe is viewed through the lens of mathematics, physics, or cosmology, the message is the same. Something organizes the chaos. Something gives structure to the void. Something sustains balance across unimaginable scales. It may be natural law, it may be emergent order, or it may be a deeper architecture that transcends human intuition. But it is unmistakably there, hiding in the equations, glowing in the cosmic background radiation, whispering through gravitational waves that traverse the universe like ancient messages. As we push further into this frontier, our role shifts from mere observers to interpreters, attempting to decode a universe written in the language of possibility. And with every step, the boundary between physics and philosophy dissolves a little more. The universe begins to feel less like a cold, indifferent void and more like a vast, interconnected system that invites exploration, insight, and awe. In this delicate balance between the known and the unknown, we stand at the edge of the cosmic blueprint, searching for the pattern that binds everything together, from the birth of galaxies to the spark of consciousness within a human mind. The deserts of Egypt have always held secrets, but beneath their sun-baked dunes lie stories older than empires, older than written history itself. These are not tales of kings and battles alone. They are warnings carved into stone, whispered through hieroglyphs, and encoded into the architecture of temples and tombs. Ancient Egyptians believed that the cosmos itself was alive, and that its balance depended on forces both visible and invisible, forces that could be disrupted if knowledge fell into the wrong hands. Every monument, every obelisk, every hidden chamber was part of a cosmic design, a system meant to preserve the harmony between heaven and earth, between the known world and the mysteries lurking beyond. Legends speak of an artifact, or perhaps a principle, sealed away so that the sky might remain whole. This purpose was both sacred and terrifying. Pharaohs, high priests, and secretive priestly orders protected it through generations, ensuring that no mortal, no matter how powerful, could wield it recklessly. To the ancient Egyptians, knowledge itself was sacred, a force more potent than armies, more enduring than dynasties, and more dangerous than any weapon. It is said that those who dared seek it without permission were struck by madness or death, leaving behind only cryptic warnings etched in temple walls. Centuries later, rumors of this skybound secret reached the ears of the Knights Templar. They were a devout, disciplined order, sworn to Christ and to the defense of the Holy Land. Yet even they were not immune to the allure of forbidden knowledge. Stories filtered back from traders, pilgrims, and surviving scribes of Alexandria. Fragments of Egyptian myths that had somehow crossed centuries and oceans. These tales spoke of a hidden chamber, its doors sealed with symbols that defied comprehension, its interior said to radiate a presence that could bend the mind. To the Templars, it was more than curiosity. It was destiny. Their faith compelled them forward, even as the warnings of the ancients whispered in their ears. What did the Egyptians fear so profoundly that they would dedicate centuries to hiding it? Some chroniclers claim it was not a weapon, but a revelation. That the object, or perhaps the knowledge itself, contained a truth about creation, the origins of the universe, or the structure of reality that could challenge everything humanity believed. Pharaohs built monuments aligned with the stars, yet some temples were purposefully concealed in ways that made them invisible to casual observers, as if the architecture itself were a lock, protecting secrets that could reshape society, religion, and the human mind. The Templars, guided by fragments of maps and cryptic letters, began their journey into this ancient mystery. They moved through desert sands where the heat and light played tricks on the eyes, where dunes shifted and swallowed tracks, and where the horizon seemed endless. Every step brought them closer to something far older than the Crusades, older than Christianity itself. They followed the hidden logic embedded in Egyptian architecture, noticing how certain pyramids and temples aligned with celestial events, the rising of Sirius, the solstices, and other cosmic markers that modern science would only rediscover centuries later. They believed that the Egyptians had left intentional clues for those who could read them, and that the reward for deciphering them could surpass any earthly treasure. But the desert was not merely a backdrop. It was a living guardian. Sandstorms rose like walls of ghosts, erasing trails and testing endurance. Heatstroke and dehydration were constant threats. The Templars had to navigate not only the physical landscape but the invisible one, the layers of meaning embedded in symbols, inscriptions, and the geometry of temples. Each discovery raised more questions than answers. A single line etched into a wall could point to a tomb, a hidden passage, or perhaps a symbolic truth meant to protect the mind of the unworthy. They realized quickly that the Egyptians did not merely hide objects. They hid understanding itself. It is said that one Templar, exhausted from days of following a series of strange alignments, paused to examine a set of hieroglyphs carved into a crumbling wall. They depicted a sky goddess bending over a seated figure, her hands covering what seemed to be a radiant sphere. Below her, inscriptions warned of the force that unbinds the heavens, and of the consequences of revealing it prematurely. The knight shivered, sensing that these were not allegories but instructions, warnings, and perhaps a prophecy. Whatever lay ahead was not meant for the faint of heart, and yet, he felt compelled to continue, driven by the mix of faith, ambition, and a hunger for understanding that had brought all of them this far. The Templars understood that they were treading into a domain where time itself was measured differently, where every generation of guardians had passed knowledge carefully from one to the next, hiding it in plain sight, leaving puzzles within puzzles. Their journey was not simply an excavation of stone. It was a test of intellect, morality, and spiritual resilience. The desert silence was oppressive, filled with the echo of uncounted centuries, a reminder that the secrets they pursued had survived natural disasters, invasions, and the decay of civilizations. They were walking into the shadow of history itself. And then came the first signs of the chamber. Buried beneath dunes and marked by subtle geometric anomalies in the terrain, it was almost invisible to the untrained eye. A depression in the sand, a subtle alignment with the setting sun, and the faintest hint of stone beneath the shifting dunes, all pointed to its location. The Templars knew instinctively that the myths were true. The Egyptians had built this place not for themselves but as a safeguard for something extraordinary. And as they began to clear the sand, revealing the top of an enormous stone slab carved with unfamiliar symbols, they realized they were standing on the threshold of something that would challenge not only their understanding of the world, but the very foundation of their faith. The air around them changed. A subtle hum, imperceptible yet pervasive, seemed to emanate from the ground. The desert wind stilled. Even the animals that occasionally wandered nearby fled, as if sensing an unseen presence. And as the first torchlight flickered across the surface of the stone door, the Templars felt it. The weight of millennia, the pressure of hidden eyes, the quiet demand of a civilization long vanished but not defeated. The Egyptians had left a warning, etched in stone and whispered through time. Some truths were meant to remain buried, and yet here they were about to uncover it. The desert, eternal and indifferent, had allowed them to reach this moment. But what lay beneath the stone would test their courage, their loyalty, and their understanding of everything they believed. They were not just confronting history. They were confronting the unknown itself, a secret carefully guarded by generations, powerful enough to change the course of human civilization, and terrifying enough to make even the bravest men hesitate. The Knights Templar were never a single, monolithic order. To the outside world, they appeared as disciplined monks and fearless warriors, bound by vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, their white mantles streaked with the red cross of martyrdom. But beneath this disciplined exterior, a more secretive layer existed, a faction within the order whose purpose, even to other Templars, was only whispered. They called themselves the Seekers, though this name was rarely recorded in any official chronicle. Their mission was not the defense of pilgrims or the protection of relics for the Church. Their mission was the pursuit of knowledge hidden from the world, knowledge older than the Crusades, older even than Christianity itself. The Seekers were recruited selectively. Candidates were observed for years, tested for both loyalty and insight. Some had an uncanny ability to decode cryptic symbols, others could memorize patterns of the stars, and a rare few demonstrated a capacity for intuitive reasoning that bordered on prophecy. These men were not merely soldiers or monks. They were guardians of something far larger than the sum of their vows. They swore allegiance not only to the order but to an invisible lineage of knowledge, one passed down through secret channels that stretched from Europe to the deserts of the Levant and beyond. Their existence was a paradox, entirely within the order yet entirely apart from it, bound by faith but driven by a quest that might contradict it. The Seekers maintained their secrecy through coded texts, obscure rituals, and silent hand signals. Meetings took place in hidden chambers beneath monasteries or within isolated fortresses in France and Jerusalem. No one outside their inner circle knew the full extent of their purpose. To the general Templar population, they appeared as diligent, if unusually inquisitive, monks. But the Seekers carried with them fragments of maps, scrolls, and artifacts that trace back to civilizations the Church barely acknowledged, fragments pointing to truths that were so ancient, so powerful, that if revealed prematurely, they could destabilize kingdoms and churches alike. Their focus had gradually turned southward, toward Egypt. Reports from returning pilgrims, travelers, and merchants spoke of ruins forgotten by time, of cryptic symbols carved into the walls of temples, and of chambers concealed beneath dunes that shifted with the desert winds. Many dismissed these stories as fanciful exaggerations or the hallucinations of heat-stricken men. But the Seekers saw a pattern. The same symbols appeared in different regions, scattered across centuries and cultures. They recognized them as markers, a hidden network left by an ancient civilization whose wisdom rivaled the Church's teachings and perhaps even contradicted them. The Templars' understanding of sacred history was suddenly incomplete, and the Seekers were determined to uncover the missing pieces. Their training was rigorous, beyond martial discipline and religious instruction. They studied languages that were nearly extinct, Proto-Hebrew, Coptic, and obscure dialects of Egyptian hieroglyphs. They learned the geometry of pyramids, the astronomy of the Nile's night skies, and the hidden mathematics embedded in temple construction. Every lesson was a preparation for a mission few could fully comprehend, to locate and interpret what the Egyptians had deemed too dangerous to reveal. Each member carried the knowledge that failure could mean not only death but also the corruption of the order itself. The Seekers' work was the tightrope between revelation and annihilation. Even within the Seekers, caution was paramount. They knew the stakes. If a king, a pope, or a rival religious order discovered their true objective, it could spark war. Worse, the knowledge they sought might be misused by those too ambitious or too fearful to understand it. One early directive, scrawled in a faded manuscript, emphasized this repeatedly. The truth may not be possessed, only guarded. Those unworthy shall suffer. It was an ethos that shaped every decision, every journey, every sacrifice. Their reconnaissance led them to Alexandria, where fragments of knowledge had survived the repeated upheavals of empire. Some artifacts had been preserved in private collections, others buried beneath temples and hidden chambers. A young seeker, named Henri, reported seeing a small black cube of unknown material, polished and inscribed with symbols that seemed to shift when observed from different angles. Henry's description was dismissed by some as madness, yet it fueled the inner circle's belief that a powerful secret lay beneath the sands, encoded not in words but in objects, alignments, and hidden geometries. Preparations for the journey southward were meticulous. Guides were chosen with care, camels and horses readied, provisions calculated to survive the harsh desert. The Seekers carried maps layered with invisible ink, compass instruments calibrated against the stars, and scrolls containing interpretations of Egyptian texts no scholar alive had fully translated. Each step was planned to avoid detection. The sands themselves seemed to conspire with the mission, erasing footprints and concealing passages. But for all their planning, the seekers understood that the desert was a living entity, capable of surprise, of punishment, and perhaps even of judgment. As they crossed the Sinai Peninsula, the reality of what they were pursuing became increasingly palpable. Hidden temples revealed faint traces of previous guardians, symbols carved into stone, traps, and markings indicating a lineage of secrecy. The seekers realized that the Egyptians had not merely buried objects. They had buried ideas, encoded in architecture, star alignments, and sacred geometry. Each discovery brought them closer to a truth the Church could never officially acknowledge, and a secret so powerful it could alter the understanding of creation itself. Tensions ran high within the group. Some knights struggled with the implications of their mission. Faith, once a source of certainty, now seemed fragile when confronted with knowledge that might challenge the very foundations of belief. Others embraced the challenge with fervor, seeing themselves as chosen intermediaries between past and future, between the mortal and the divine. Yet all understood the same unspoken truth. Once discovered, the secret they sought could never be safely revealed to the world. And so, with each step deeper into the desert, each layer of sand and stone peeled back from the earth, the seekers moved closer to their ultimate goal. A hidden chamber, untouched by time, constructed by minds that had anticipated generations to come. A place where the Templars would confront not merely a relic, but a revelation. A chamber that would force them to question faith, morality, and destiny itself. The journey of the seekers was no longer a pilgrimage. It had become a test, a trial against time, against nature, and against the weight of knowledge too powerful for ordinary men. And though none of them could yet see the chamber's threshold, they knew instinctively that what lay ahead would define their order, their legacy, and perhaps the course of human history itself. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a vast expanse of gold and shadow, broken only by jagged ridges and the occasional rise of ancient stone barely distinguishable from the dunes. Each day, the sun scorched their shoulders, and each night, the temperature plummeted, testing the endurance of the Knights Templar who pressed ever southward. This was not the desert of legends or the one drawn in pilgrims' tales. It was merciless, indifferent, and alive, shifting its dunes with secret currents that seemed almost conscious, as if it were aware of intruders in a forbidden domain. The Templars, and particularly the inner circle of seekers, knew they were venturing into a place where history itself seemed to hold its breath, where every grain of sand could conceal a warning or a trap left by civilizations long vanished. Their maps were detailed, yet even they could not capture the subtle cues embedded in the terrain, slight depressions, the faintly uneven alignment of rocks, and the eerie geometry of dunes that seemed arranged with purpose. The seekers had learned to read these signs as if deciphering a language. One misstep could send them far off course. One misinterpretation could mean discovery too soon, and discovery, in their understanding, could be fatal. As they advanced, the desert appeared to conspire, reshaping its own surface to obscure their path. Horses refused to move on certain patches, as if sensing something beneath. Camels balked at crossing what seemed to be ordinary sand, and even seasoned guides felt a creeping unease. By the third day, they reached an area where the desert floor was broken by the faint outlines of stones unlike any natural formation. At first, it appeared as scattered remnants of a ruined settlement, but closer inspection revealed deliberate placement. Stones aligned with precision, carved not by wind or water, but by human hands. Here and there, traces of what seemed like shallow channels suggested ancient drainage, yet their dimensions and angles were far too precise to serve mere practicality. The seekers began to realize that they had stumbled upon a hidden structure, one the sands had protected for centuries. It was not visible from a distance, and it had been left unrecorded in any known chronicle, a forgotten chapter of Egyptian architecture, preserved in deliberate secrecy. As they navigated these ruins, inscriptions began to appear. Faint, almost erased by time, These symbols combined hieroglyphs with strange geometric patterns that bore no immediately recognizable meaning. Some of the Templars whispered that they looked like a language designed not to communicate stories but to preserve knowledge. One knight, trained in ancient scripts, suggested that the symbols were not intended to be read linearly, but as a multidimensional code, one that revealed its secrets only when the observer aligned their perspective perfectly with both the structure and the stars above. It was an idea so alien, so precise, that it seemed the architects had built the desert itself as part of the mechanism. Nightfall brought further revelations. The Templars made camp near the ruins, and as the sun set, a constellation rose that appeared to mimic the patterns carved into the stones. Orion's belt, Sirius, and other celestial markers seemed to mirror the architecture below, as if the entire complex had been constructed as an earthly reflection of the heavens. One seeker knelt, tracing lines in the sand with his finger, and realized the shadows of certain stones aligned perfectly with the stars' positions at a specific hour. A hidden calendar, a cosmic compass, a celestial lock. They were beginning to understand that this was not a tomb, not a temple in the traditional sense, but a map carved in stone and sand, a puzzle of immense sophistication pointing toward something buried deeper still. Their excitement was tempered by fear. The desert's silence at night was absolute, punctuated only by the distant cry of a hawk or the whisper of the wind. Yet the Templars sensed that the ruins themselves were watching. The more time they spent deciphering the inscriptions, the more they felt the weight of history pressing down on them. It was as if the original builders had anticipated every step, every movement, and had constructed a series of warnings for those who would come too soon or with insufficient understanding. The desert became a gauntlet, testing their resolve, their intellect, and the very strength of their faith. By the fifth day, a breakthrough occurred. The lead seeker noticed a subtle depression beneath a set of stones partially covered by sand. It was a barely perceptible rectangle, a threshold invisible unless one knew where to look. When they cleared the sand, a stone slab emerged, its surface smooth and cold, etched with symbols that defied interpretation. The markings radiated a faint aura, or at least the Templars felt it so. One knight dropped to his knees, overwhelmed by a combination of exhaustion, reverence, and a fear that bordered on superstition. Others felt the same, a chilling recognition that they had arrived at something far beyond conventional understanding. This was the entrance to the chamber the legends had whispered about. As they prepared to move the stone slab, the desert shifted once more. A sudden gust of wind blew in from the north, carrying with it a fine, powdery sand that stung the eyes and obscured vision. The Templars paused, instinctively recognizing the warning encoded in the natural world. The wind's timing was too precise to be coincidence. The desert itself seemed to resist their intrusion, a final guardian before the forbidden secret below. Torches were lit, and the seekers positioned themselves carefully, both to illuminate the threshold and to brace for whatever lay within. Every movement was deliberate, measured, as if disturbing the slab incorrectly might trigger a trap designed centuries ago. With great effort, they began to lift the stone, revealing the mouth of a dark passage descending into the earth. The air that escaped was colder than expected, carrying with it the scent of stone, earth, and something indefinably ancient, a metallic tang that hinted at tools, artifacts, or machinery lost to time. Silence fell over the group. No one spoke, for fear that sound itself might disturb forces better left undisturbed. Torches illuminated the passage's walls, revealing further carvings. Hieroglyphs interwoven with symbols they had never seen, a language of geometry, mythology, and hidden science. The Templars realized that the chamber they were about to enter was not merely a burial site, not merely a treasure trove, but a repository of knowledge. Knowledge so dangerous, so profound, that it had been hidden from the world for millennia. And yet, despite the fear, the exhaustion, and the warnings, the Templars descended. Step by step, they entered the darkness, each footfall echoing through the narrow passage as though announcing their intrusion to an audience unseen. The further they went, the more the air changed, growing heavier, denser, almost electric, as if charged with the memory of every hand that had carved the chamber. every eye that had glimpsed its secrets, and every mind that had dared to interpret them. The desert above seemed to vanish completely. There was no sky, no wind, no sun. Only stone, shadows, and the deep, pulsing presence of something waiting below. They were no longer knights of Christendom in this moment. They were explorers, seekers, trespassers in a realm where time had little. The chamber revealed itself slowly, as though testing the Templars' patience, their courage, and their perception. The passage ended in a massive archway, carved from a single slab of black stone that shimmered faintly even in the flickering torchlight. The surface was etched with intricate patterns, geometric lines interwoven with symbols the knights could not identify, a language older than any they had seen, older than the first pharaohs. The carvings seemed to pulse with a quiet rhythm, like a heartbeat frozen in stone, a reminder that this place was alive in some sense beyond human understanding. Some of the knights instinctively reached out to touch the walls, only to withdraw their hands as a sudden shiver ran up their spines. The chamber was vast, far larger than the entrance suggested, with ceilings so high that the torches' flames barely illuminated the far corners. It was not merely a room. It was a sanctuary of knowledge, a vault built for minds and secrets that could not be contained in ordinary spaces. The air inside was heavy, scented with ancient stone, dust, and something else. A faint metallic tang, like iron or blood, but not quite either. It was almost as if the chamber itself exhaled, a living container holding memories, knowledge, and warning. The Templars moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing against the cold, unyielding stone. Every detail of the architecture seemed deliberate. Pillars aligned with the stars, inscriptions mirrored celestial constellations, and the floor was engraved with a circular pattern that appeared to map the night sky in exacting precision. The chamber was not just a tomb, nor a treasury. It was a mechanism, a codex of stone and light meant to teach, to guide, or perhaps to guard. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, carved from a single block of obsidian that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. Atop it rested an object covered by a cloth that seemed woven from something ancient, delicate, and unearthly. The object radiated a presence that defied description, a sense of weight and importance not measured in pounds, but in the very reality of being. One knight, overcome by awe, whispered that it was as if the object were aware of them, as if it could see into their intentions, their hearts, and their minds. Others nodded silently, feeling an inexplicable fear, a profound respect, and an excitement that was almost intoxicating. The leader of the Seekers approached the pedestal, his torch casting trembling shadows on the walls. He could see faint markings on the cloth, symbols similar to those on the walls, a visual echo suggesting that the object beneath was not an artifact of ordinary use but a key, a repository, perhaps even a message from a civilization that understood truths long lost to humanity. With a cautious hand, he lifted the cloth, revealing an object that seemed to defy the laws of form and light. It was not metal nor stone, nor any material known to them. It absorbed the torchlight, as if devouring illumination, creating a space around it that felt impossible. Some knights felt a chill that raced through their bones, as if their very understanding of reality was being challenged. The markings on the pedestal were as cryptic as the object itself. Hieroglyphs intertwined with geometric patterns suggested a purpose far beyond human comprehension. One knight, who had studied Egyptian astronomy, recognized constellations in the carvings and realized that the pedestal, the object, and the entire chamber were aligned with cosmic events. The chamber was designed to interact with the heavens. And if so, the object might hold knowledge or power tied to forces far beyond what they had imagined. Forces capable of influencing not only men but the very fabric of the world. The Templars understood then that this was the culmination of centuries of guarding and hiding. Generations of Egyptians, perhaps secretive priestly orders long lost, had constructed this place to shelter something dangerous, profound, and transformative. The warnings etched into the walls were not merely symbolic. They were a testament to the stakes involved. The object could enlighten or destroy, could alter understanding, challenge faith, and disrupt the natural order. Even the most devout knights felt a moment of hesitation, sensing that what lay before them demanded caution beyond their years of training and vows. As they studied the chamber further, they noticed smaller details that amplified the mystery. Faint grooves along the walls suggested movement, like mechanisms once functional but now dormant. Small alcoves, seemingly empty, might have held additional artifacts, or perhaps they contained chambers hidden beneath the floor, accessible only through secret alignments. Dust had settled unevenly, implying that air currents, or perhaps something more subtle, had interacted with the chamber over centuries. Every element seemed intentional, calculated, and imbued with meaning, yet purpose remained obscured, teasing the Templars into deeper inquiry. One of the knights knelt to trace a pattern on the floor. It radiated outward like ripples on water, intersecting at points that corresponded to symbols on the walls and ceiling. Suddenly, he realized that the floor pattern aligned with solar and lunar cycles, eclipses, and movements of the planets. The chamber was not static. It was a dynamic system, perhaps designed to activate under precise celestial conditions. The Templars realized they were standing in a place of science, religion, and mystery intertwined in a way the world above had long forgotten. It was a nexus of knowledge and power, a place where human understanding could touch eternity if only it dared. Time seemed suspended within the chamber. The desert's heat, the fatigue of their journey, and the burdens of their vows faded, replaced by the overwhelming presence of the object and the surrounding architecture. The Templars could sense that they were not alone, not in the physical sense, but in the spiritual and historical sense. They felt the weight of every generation that had constructed this place, guarded it, and hidden its truth. They felt the gaze of civilizations long dead, the watchfulness of ancestors who had calculated each stone, each symbol, and each alignment with precision that defied mortal comprehension. Fear mixed with reverence. Excitement warred with caution. And as the leader reached toward the object again, the chamber seemed to respond, a subtle vibration in the air that hinted at latent energy. It was not mechanical nor magical in any ordinary sense. It was as though the chamber itself possessed awareness, a dormant intelligence waiting for the right minds to uncover its purpose. The Templars understood that touching the object would be irreversible. There was no turning back. Their lives, their faith, and perhaps the very world above depended on what they chose to do next. And so, surrounded by the ancient carvings, the mysterious geometry, and the heavy presence of the object, the Templars paused. They were no longer simply knights on a desert quest. They were witnesses to something forbidden, something powerful enough to alter history, religion, and the understanding of reality itself. The chamber had revealed its entrance, but the secret it contained demanded more than courage. It demanded insight, restraint, and an understanding that what lay ahead could change everything, and that once revealed, nothing would ever be the same. The Templars stood in stunned silence, the weight of centuries pressing down upon them. The chamber seemed to breathe, the walls exhaling faint whispers that no ear could catch yet every mind seemed to feel. The object on the pedestal was no ordinary relic. It was something far older, something that carried with it the memory of civilizations, the imprint of knowledge so profound that it could not be fully comprehended by human minds. Its black surface absorbed light, drawing the torch flames into itself, creating an illusion of emptiness that was somehow heavy with meaning. The knights could not look away. They felt simultaneously drawn to it and repelled, as if the artifact were aware of their intentions, capable of judging them, capable of discerning who was worthy and who was not. The leader of the seekers stepped forward, his hand trembling slightly. Every instinct screamed caution, yet every impulse of curiosity and duty urged him closer. The inscriptions on the pedestal glowed faintly in response to his movement, revealing patterns invisible moments before, lines of geometry that seemed to rearrange themselves as if alive. The walls echoed with subtle vibrations, a resonance that penetrated bone and spirit alike. One knight whispered that he felt the pulse of the chamber itself, synchronized with something unseen yet undeniable, a rhythm older than the desert, older than any known human civilization. The air thickened, and even seasoned knights struggled to breathe without conscious effort. They had come seeking knowledge, perhaps treasure, certainly revelation. but this exceeded anything they could have imagined. It was as if the Egyptians had encoded a fragment of the cosmos itself into stone and placed it under the sands, a seed of understanding meant to endure millennia, to awaken only when minds capable of perceiving it arrived. And now, here they were, the first in centuries, perhaps the first ever, to approach its threshold. The significance of this realization was terrifying. One wrong gesture, one misstep, and centuries of accumulated secrets might be lost, or worse, unleashed in ways they could not control. In the flickering torchlight, a subtle movement caught the leader's eye. The object seemed to shift, not physically but perceptually. Lines that were solid moments before became fluid, surfaces that were flat appeared to curve, and symbols that had been hidden seemed to emerge, their meaning tantalizingly close yet frustratingly opaque. The knights exchanged glances, silently acknowledging that the object was more than material. It was interactive, a repository of encoded information waiting for comprehension. Their minds strained, attempting to parse the shifting symbols, the subtle alignments, the hidden patterns that seemed to respond to their observation. One of the younger Templars, a scholar named Pierre, approached cautiously. He had studied rare texts and had an instinct for hidden language. He crouched to examine the pedestal more closely, running his fingers along grooves invisible to the casual eye. As he did, he noticed a faint indentation in the floor beneath the pedestal, a perfect circle that matched a constellation visible through a small aperture in the ceiling. The chamber, the object, and the heavens were aligned, part of a complex system that connected earth and sky, time and space, knowledge and perception. The revelation sent shivers down their spines. They were standing in a place where the Egyptians had encoded not just a secret, but a mechanism to interact with the cosmos itself. The walls seemed to respond to their discoveries. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, as if the light from their torches were bending to reveal hidden dimensions. One knight stepped backward, suddenly aware that they were no longer merely observers. They were participants in an event orchestrated centuries ago. Every movement, every glance, every thought was being acknowledged by the chamber. The object was not inert. It was dynamic, a focus of ancient intelligence designed to interact with those deemed worthy of understanding. And the Templars realized that this intelligence was not benevolent in a human sense. It was impartial, indifferent to morality, and concerned only with the integrity of knowledge and the precision of comprehension. A sense of urgency settled over them. The longer they remained, the more the chamber seemed to assert its presence, pressing against the edges of their understanding. Their training as knights, their faith, their rigorous discipline, all were tested against a force that transcended ordinary comprehension. They began to perceive that the Egyptians had not merely hidden a relic. They had created a living puzzle, one that could not be solved by brute force, by prayer alone, or by conventional wisdom. It required insight, patience, and a willingness to surrender assumptions about reality itself. The younger knights grew anxious. Some suggested that they should retreat, to leave the chamber and return with reinforcements or more learned scholars. But the leader reminded them that the secret had survived millennia because it demanded a delicate touch, and any interference by those unprepared could destroy it or render it incomprehensible. Hesitation was dangerous, but so was reckless action. Each knight felt the weight of responsibility crushing them, knowing that their choices could echo far beyond the walls of this hidden chamber. Then came a subtle illumination. The object began to project faint lines of light onto the walls, a lattice of geometry that traced celestial alignments, sacred proportions, and mathematical patterns that connected with the constellations above. Symbols emerged within symbols, hidden equations encoded into reliefs and glyphs, revealing a depth of understanding that dwarfed even the most erudite scholars in Europe. The chamber itself was a library, a laboratory, and a sanctuary, all at once. A space designed not for storage but for comprehension. The Egyptians, in their wisdom, had anticipated the arrival of minds capable of interpreting it. And now the Templars were those minds. Fear and awe merged into a single, overwhelming sensation. They were no longer simply Knights Templar. They were witnesses to a civilization that had transcended time, leaving behind a testament to intelligence and vision that defied human chronology. Every pulse of air, every shift in shadow, Every vibration of the floor seemed deliberate, a signal to guide, warn, and test them. And as the leader of the seekers reached toward the object again, a profound realization took hold. This was not merely a secret to be uncovered, but a challenge to their understanding of reality itself. The chamber demanded more than courage. It demanded clarity of mind and purity of intent. One wrong gesture could collapse centuries of knowledge or trigger forces beyond their control. And yet, the object remained tantalizingly accessible, inviting them to uncover its purpose, to see the truth encoded by a civilization that had anticipated their arrival across the expanse of history. They understood, with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, that they were standing on the threshold of revelation. A threshold that, once crossed, could alter the course of human understanding forever. The leader of the seekers took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm of thoughts and emotions raging within him. For years, he had trained for battles, for strategy, for the defense of pilgrims and sacred sites, but nothing in all his experience had prepared him for this. The object before him was not a weapon, not a treasure, not even a relic in the conventional sense. It was a repository of understanding, a condensation of knowledge so profound that it felt alive. As his hand hovered above it, he could feel a faint vibration, like a pulse syncing with his own heartbeat. The chamber seemed to respond to his intent, subtle waves of energy rippling across the walls, casting shifting shadows that brought the inscriptions to life in ways previously invisible. Every Templar in the chamber felt the tension. Some whispered prayers, others stood in silent awe, and a few simply stared, unable to tear their eyes away from the dark, enigmatic surface. The object radiated a sense of intelligence, a silent awareness that seemed to probe their hearts, testing their intentions, measuring their courage. To handle it recklessly would be to invite disaster. Yet to hesitate too long was to miss the moment that centuries of secrecy had preserved. The Egyptians had designed this chamber as a safeguard, a test of merit and insight, and it was now the knight's responsibility to navigate it without faltering. Slowly, deliberately, the leader's fingers brushed the surface. The object reacted immediately, sending a shiver of energy through his arm and up his spine. The chamber vibrated faintly, almost imperceptibly at first, then more insistently, as if acknowledging their presence and willingness to engage. The inscriptions on the walls seemed to shift and reorient themselves, forming lines and angles that had been hidden moments before. The geometric patterns of the floor glowed faintly, tracing paths that led to the pedestal, converging precisely on the object. The Templars realized, almost simultaneously, that they were not merely observing. They were participating in an activation, a sequence designed to test comprehension, focus, and intent. One of the younger knights, Pierre, knelt and traced the illuminated lines with his fingers, connecting the constellations projected on the walls with the circular symbols etched into the floor. He gasped as he recognized the sequence. The chamber itself functioned as a map, a guide to forces both celestial and terrestrial. The Egyptians had encoded cycles of the sun, the moon, and the stars into the very structure, linking them to events that occurred across millennia. The object at the center was not merely a key. It was the culmination of this cosmic code, a focal point through which knowledge, power, and understanding could be channeled. The implications struck the Templars with the force of revelation. They were standing in a place designed to interface with the cosmos itself, to bridge the gap between human perception and the hidden laws that govern the universe. The Egyptians had anticipated centuries of observation, study, and understanding, creating a mechanism that demanded both insight and restraint. One wrong interpretation could not only destroy the object's purpose but also trigger consequences beyond human comprehension. The weight of responsibility was staggering. Each knight understood that this moment would define the legacy of their order, the path of knowledge, and the boundaries of what humanity could safely access. As the leader continued to study the object, a faint hum began to resonate through the chamber. It was subtle, almost musical, a vibration that seemed to emerge from the object itself and interact with the walls, floor, and ceiling. The Templars felt it in their bones, a sound that bypassed the ears entirely, communicating instead directly to the mind. Symbols rearranged themselves in response, forming constellations, equations, and diagrams that defied conventional comprehension. The air grew heavy with anticipation, charged with an energy that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The chamber was alive, a conscious structure, and the object was its heart. The leader realized that the object was not a static artifact. It was interactive, responsive, and adaptive. It responded to attention, to understanding, to intention. As they observed, patterns emerged that hinted at deeper layers of meaning, sequences that would only reveal themselves to those capable of perceiving the interconnectedness of the universe. The chamber was not merely a hiding place. It was a classroom, a test, a trial by which the Egyptians had ensured that only minds capable of insight could access the knowledge contained within. The Templars were beginning to comprehend that what lay before them was as much a philosophical challenge as a physical one, demanding not only courage and discipline but clarity of thought and moral discernment. Suddenly, a soft vibration traveled up the pedestal. The object shifted imperceptibly, and for the first time, the Templars saw what had been hidden within its obsidian surface. A series of lines, almost like veins of light, slowly tracing intricate patterns that mirrored those on the walls and floor. The chamber's architecture, the constellations above, and the object itself were now visibly linked, forming a complete, interconnected system. The realization hit them simultaneously. The Egyptians had created a physical manifestation of knowledge, a tangible map of reality encoded in stone, geometry, and celestial alignment. A sense of awe and fear gripped them. The Templars understood that the object could provide access to truths long hidden, insights into the cosmos, human nature, and the laws that bound them. Yet it could just as easily overwhelm, destabilize, or destroy those unprepared to comprehend it. Their faith, training, and discipline were being tested in ways no battlefield ever had. The chamber demanded wisdom, patience, and integrity. It was a challenge designed not to reward arrogance but to measure the capacity of those who approached it. The leader finally spoke, his voice low but steady. He reminded the knights of their vows, of the balance between duty and understanding. The object demanded respect, restraint, and focus. To reach for knowledge recklessly would be to court disaster. Yet, with each passing moment, the chamber seemed to respond to their measured observation, suggesting that cautious engagement, combined with intellect and intention, was the path forward. The Templars realized that the centuries-long effort of the Egyptians had prepared this moment for minds like theirs, discipline tempered with insight, courage tempered with reverence. And so, with careful deliberation, they began to explore the object's mysteries, tracing patterns, observing responses, and noting alignments with celestial markers above. Each interaction revealed new layers of meaning, small revelations that hinted at an interconnected web of knowledge spanning the heavens and the earth. The Templars felt themselves stepping into a legacy that stretched beyond time, beyond kingdoms, beyond religion itself. The chamber had grown still, yet the air seemed charged with an energy that was almost tangible, a presence that whispered along the edges of perception. The Templars, exhausted yet captivated, gathered closer around the pedestal, their eyes fixed on the black obsidian object that had become the center of their existence. For hours, they had traced symbols, mapped alignments, and discussed what little they could comprehend of the intricate latticework projected across the walls, the floor, and even the ceiling. Every observation seemed to reveal a new layer, a hidden pattern within a pattern, a message encoded so precisely that it demanded their full attention and their deepest respect. The weight of history pressed down upon them, not as a burden but as a call to understanding, a reminder that they were participating in a story written long before their time. Pierre, the youngest of the seekers, was the first to notice it. A subtle glow emanating from within the veins of the object that traced lines converging at a single point on its surface. He hesitated, uncertain if he should speak, but the leader leaned closer, and Pierre's voice trembled as he pointed out the convergence. The glow responded to his gesture, intensifying as though acknowledging the observation. A collective gasp escaped the knights. The realization was staggering. The object was not inert. It responded to attention, comprehension, and intent. The Egyptians had designed it to interact with those who approached it intelligently, selectively rewarding insight while remaining inaccessible to the unworthy. The leader, a man hardened by battles and tested by years of faith, felt a chill run down his spine. This was no ordinary discovery. He realized, in a dawning horror and awe, that the object might contain knowledge so profound that it could destabilize centuries of understanding about the world, about creation, and about humankind's place within it. He glanced at the other knights. Their faces reflected the same mixture of reverence and fear. Some clutched their crosses, muttering prayers under their breath, while others simply stared, paralyzed by the realization that they were witnessing something that defied explanation. The object was a key, but to what door and to whose domain they could not yet fathom. Slowly, carefully, the leader extended a finger and traced one of the glowing veins. The object responded almost immediately, shifting slightly, as if recognizing the touch and intent of the seeker. Lines on the floor shifted in response, forming a sequence of geometric shapes that intersected perfectly with the inscriptions on the walls. The entire chamber seemed to come alive. Shadows moved in synchrony with the illumination, revealing inscriptions that had been invisible moments before. Hidden within these inscriptions were diagrams, symbols, and patterns suggesting cycles of the sun, moon, and planets. Knowledge that the Egyptians had encoded with a precision that rivaled, or even exceeded, anything known in Europe. One of the older knights whispered that it was as if the chamber itself were a machine, a construct of knowledge designed to awaken only when approached with patience, intelligence, and intention. He knelt to examine the floor, tracing the new sequence of symbols, and realized that it mapped not just celestial events but also a process, a method of interpreting the cosmos that was encoded into both mathematics and ritual. The chamber was more than a repository of information. It was an interactive interface between the seeker and the universe, a sacred laboratory that demanded comprehension on multiple levels: intellectual, spiritual, and moral. Hours passed, yet the Templars were oblivious to time. The desert outside, the scorching sun and the biting cold of night, had vanished in significance. The only reality that mattered was the chamber, the object, and the slow unveiling of its secrets. The younger knights began to feel a strange resonance with the object. Some experienced visions, fleeting, abstract flashes of light and geometry, while others felt a profound emotional pull, as though the object were communicating not in words but in the language of understanding itself. These experiences were disorienting yet enlightening. They reinforced the realization that this chamber was not a mere hiding place. It was a sacred dialogue, a test of comprehension designed by minds who had long anticipated human curiosity. Then came the first revelation. The leader noticed a sequence within the object's light veins that corresponded with the Egyptian hieroglyphs depicting dualities: life and death, creation and destruction, the mortal and the divine. As he traced the pattern, a portion of the wall shifted imperceptibly, revealing a hidden alcove. Within it lay a set of scrolls, remarkably preserved by the dry air and the sanctity of the chamber. These scrolls contained diagrams and writings that combined astronomical knowledge with philosophical speculation, a guide to understanding forces that governed both the heavens and human perception. The Templars realized that the Egyptians had not merely hidden this chamber for protection. They had built it as an educational crucible, a place to test those who sought truths that could change civilizations. Fear gripped them anew. What they were witnessing was no mere artifact. It was an interface to knowledge so advanced that it could overwhelm the unprepared mind. The chamber, they now understood, was intentionally selective. It rewarded focus, insight, and restraint, but it also punished arrogance and haste. The energy in the room seemed to respond to intent. Any reckless action could have consequences far beyond physical harm. The knights understood that they were walking a razor's edge between enlightenment and catastrophe. The leader signaled for silence. Every knight held their breath as he carefully studied the glowing patterns and the newly revealed scrolls. One of the hieroglyphs depicted a figure holding a radiant sphere, labeled with symbols indicating balance, harmony, and alignment with cosmic forces. Another suggested cycles of human history intertwined with celestial cycles, as if the Egyptians understood the interconnectedness of time, space, and destiny in ways the Templars had never imagined. This chamber was a testament to a civilization that had reached an understanding humanity would struggle to match for centuries. As they delved deeper, a sense of purpose began to crystallize. The object was not a weapon, not a treasure for kings, not a prize for conquest. It was a tool, a repository of understanding meant to guide, to enlighten, and perhaps to test the ethical and intellectual capacity of those who engaged with it. The Templars, despite their exhaustion and awe, began to feel a profound responsibility. They were custodians now, participants in a story that stretched across millennia, tasked with safeguarding a knowledge that could elevate or destroy depending on how it was applied. And in the quiet of that chamber, illuminated only by torchlight and the object's faint glow, the first clear understanding emerged. The secret of the Egyptians was not simply a hidden treasure. It was a living framework of wisdom, a convergence of science, philosophy, and morality. Unlocking it would require every skill they possessed, every ounce of insight, and the courage to confront truths that might challenge everything they believed about the world, their faith, and themselves. The Templars had crossed the threshold into knowledge forbidden for centuries, and from this moment forward, nothing would ever be the same. The chamber seemed to respond to the Templars' growing comprehension, as if recognizing their progress and preparing to reveal its deeper truths. The glowing veins within the object pulsed in synchronization with the geometric patterns on the floor, walls, and ceiling, forming an intricate web of light that connected the Templars, the object, and the celestial alignments above. The air vibrated faintly, a resonance that penetrated bone and spirit alike, and the knights began to sense that what they were witnessing was not simply a repository of knowledge, but a living system, one designed to communicate across dimensions of understanding they had never before encountered. It was as if the Egyptians had anticipated the arrival of minds capable of interpreting not just symbols, but the underlying principles of reality itself. Pierre, the young scholar among them, was the first to notice a startling correspondence. The symbols on the object and the patterns projected on the walls mirrored historical events, mapped in a way that suggested cycles of rise and fall, conquest and collapse, spread not only across Egypt but across civilizations. These cycles were encoded not merely as abstract diagrams, but as interactive patterns meant to teach the observer the flow of human history as it intersected with cosmic forces. The Templars felt a shiver run through them. The Egyptians had embedded a predictive framework into the chamber, a way of understanding not only the past but the future, though interpreting it correctly would demand insight beyond ordinary comprehension. The leader traced a line along the floor pattern, and suddenly the object responded in a remarkable way. A faint hum rose, almost musical, harmonizing with the geometry of the room, and a hidden panel in the wall shifted, revealing a set of golden plates covered in delicate, unrecognizable inscriptions. They glimmered faintly, reflecting the torchlight in a manner that seemed almost deliberate, as if the object had guided the chamber to reveal them at this precise moment. The Templars approached cautiously. These plates were clearly intended for a human hand, but they carried an aura of caution, a subtle warning that careless reading could lead to misunderstanding, or worse. The inscriptions depicted events that predated the pharaohs, civilizations lost to time, and movements of celestial bodies in patterns that seemed impossibly precise. One knight, trained in astronomy, recognized alignments with constellations that were visible only every several centuries, confirming that the Egyptians had encoded temporal knowledge into both architecture and artifacts. It was not merely information, it was instruction, a codex of cosmic law, human destiny, and the intertwining of the two. As they examined the plates, a sense of profound awe settled over the group. They realized that the Templars had not stumbled upon treasure, but upon a teaching device designed to expand human understanding, a carefully constructed dialogue across time between those who had built the chamber and those worthy of comprehending it. The more they examined the symbols, the more unnerving the implications became. Among the abstract depictions were subtle references to human behavior, morality, and governance. The Egyptians had encoded ethical lessons into the cosmic framework, suggesting that knowledge of the universe could not be divorced from moral comprehension. The object had not merely been a test of intellect, it was also a test of character. The Templars felt an invisible weight settle upon them, an understanding that their actions within the chamber could determine not only the preservation of the secret, but also its potential consequences in the world beyond. Suddenly, one of the knights noticed a series of concentric circles etched into the floor, previously unnoticed. Following their alignment, the leader realized they corresponded to key positions of planets and stars at historically significant moments: the founding of empires, the rise and fall of dynasties, the birth of philosophies that shaped civilization. The Egyptians had constructed a chronology that was both astronomical and historical, a living timeline that connected human events with cosmic cycles. The chamber, the object, and now the plates were all interconnected, revealing a sophistication that challenged every assumption the Templars had held about the ancient world. As they deciphered the first few sequences, a more immediate and startling revelation emerged. The object seemed to encode not only cycles of the past but possible futures, conditional upon human action. The Egyptians had built a predictive model of events, a map of cause and effect that integrated celestial movements, human decisions, and moral consequences. The Templars were confronted with a chilling thought. They were not merely observing history, they were standing at the nexus of knowledge that could influence it. The responsibility was immense. To misinterpret even a single symbol could have ramifications far beyond their comprehension, potentially altering the course of kingdoms, faiths, or the balance of human society itself. The object pulsed in response to their growing understanding, its veins of light intensifying, casting complex, shifting shadows that animated the chamber in a surreal, almost hypnotic display. The walls, once silent and inert, now seemed to speak in a language of geometry, conveying principles of harmony, proportion, and consequence. The Templars realized that every movement, every observation, every touch was part of a dialogue, a reciprocal exchange between the seeker and the artifact, and that this dialogue demanded total focus, integrity, and reverence. The chamber was not static. It was interactive, intelligent, and deeply moral in its design. A sudden, sharp vibration emanated from the pedestal, drawing the Templars' attention. The object itself had shifted slightly, revealing a compartment previously invisible. Inside lay a series of crystalline spheres, perfectly smooth, reflecting the torchlight in rainbow patterns that seemed impossible, almost supernatural. One of the older knights whispered that they resembled representations of planets, stars, and cosmic forces, but encoded with an intelligence far beyond ordinary astronomy. The spheres were aligned in a pattern that mirrored the object and the chamber itself, suggesting that the Egyptians had created a physical model of cosmic principles, one that integrated matter, energy, and human action into a coherent, interactive system. The knights understood that they had crossed a boundary. They were no longer mere explorers. They were participants in a design that spanned time and space. The chamber was a school, a laboratory, and a sanctuary. The object, the plates, and the spheres together formed an intricate puzzle, a mechanism to teach, challenge, and perhaps even guide those capable of understanding it. Each revelation carried moral and ethical weight. They realized that this was not knowledge to be hoarded, used for personal gain, or revealed recklessly. It demanded guardianship, wisdom, and restraint. As the Templars absorbed the enormity of what they had discovered, a collective realization struck them. The Egyptians had not merely built a hidden chamber. They had built a safeguard for knowledge, one that could alter civilization if misused. The object was a key to understanding, but only in the hands of those prepared to comprehend its full implications. The chamber, the object, the plates, and the spheres together were a warning, a test, and an invitation. The Templars understood that their journey had only begun. The true challenge was not merely uncovering the artifact, but interpreting it correctly, resisting temptation, and protecting its secrets from those unworthy of them. In that moment, the leader looked around at his companions, seeing reflected in their eyes the same mixture of awe, fear, and determination that he felt. They were on the precipice of knowledge that could redefine history, faith, and humanity's understanding of the cosmos. The chamber had revealed its first layer of truth, but deeper mysteries remained, hidden in the object's veins, the golden plates, and the crystalline spheres. The Templars knew that every step forward would demand courage, intellect, and discipline far beyond what any battlefield could teach. They had entered the heart of a civilization's wisdom, and the consequences of their discoveries would echo far beyond the desert, far beyond their order, and perhaps across the span of human history itself. The chamber seemed to shift subtly around the Templars, as if acknowledging their growing understanding and preparing to reveal even deeper layers of its secret. The object at the center pulsed with a quiet luminescence, and the crystalline spheres previously revealed reflected shifting patterns of light across the walls, floor, and ceiling. These were no ordinary reflections. They formed moving constellations, sequences of geometry, and symbols that had previously been hidden. The Templars realized, almost simultaneously, that they were witnessing a dynamic interface, an ancient machine of knowledge, intelligence, and warning, designed not for passive observation but for active engagement. The Egyptians, in their foresight, had constructed a system that demanded both intellectual rigor and moral discernment. Pierre, still kneeling by the glowing patterns on the floor, traced lines connecting the spheres with the veins of light in the central object. As he did, a pattern emerged that seemed to depict cycles of human civilization, tied intricately to celestial alignments. Wars, revolutions, the rise and fall of empires, all were encoded not merely as historical events, but as part of a greater rhythm dictated by cosmic forces. The implications were staggering. The Egyptians had not only understood astronomy, mathematics, and architecture, but they had also developed a sophisticated model of history itself, integrating human action with universal principles. The leader moved closer, his hand hovering over one of the spheres. As he touched it, faint lines of light leapt from the sphere, connecting with the central object and illuminating previously hidden symbols on the walls. These symbols depicted sequences of human morality, decisions, and consequences, suggesting that the chamber's mechanism accounted not only for cosmic and historical forces, but also for the ethical dimensions of human behavior. The Templars realized with a mix of awe and trepidation that this was not merely a repository of knowledge. It was a moral instrument, a system that evaluated, tested, and perhaps even guided the intentions of those who engaged with it. As they explored further, the chamber began to reveal more subtle interactions. Shadows cast by the torches shifted in response to their movements, aligning with symbols that now seemed animated, forming sequences and connections they had not noticed before. The floor, previously a static diagram, now displayed shifting circles and lines, reflecting movements of planets, stars, and other celestial bodies. Each adjustment seemed synchronized with the object's pulses, suggesting that the Egyptians had created an extraordinarily precise model of the cosmos, one that integrated observation, geometry, and perhaps even predictive capability. The Templars felt as though they were standing at the very intersection of human understanding and divine insight. Hours passed, and exhaustion began to press upon them, yet no one wished to stop. Each new alignment, each faint glow, each pattern discovered only deepened the sense of wonder and responsibility. One of the knights, a scholar trained in mathematics, began to record the patterns, attempting to translate them into a form they could study outside the chamber. He quickly realized the futility. These patterns were not merely symbols or equations. They were interactive, requiring presence, intention, and comprehension. Attempting to replicate them without understanding their underlying principles would render them meaningless, perhaps even dangerous. Then came the first shocking revelation. One of the sequences traced across the spheres and onto the floor depicted events that had not yet occurred, or at least not in the form they were presented. The Templars stared in disbelief as the object and spheres illustrated potential conflicts, rises and falls of powers, and the movement of people across regions. The Egyptians had encoded predictive knowledge, a model that suggested they could foresee the flow of history conditioned upon human decisions and celestial alignments. The Templars were no longer merely observers of a secret. They were witnessing a system that could anticipate and perhaps influence the course of civilizations. The implications were staggering. If interpreted correctly, the object and chamber could provide strategic insight into wars, political shifts, and natural phenomena. Yet misuse or misunderstanding could have catastrophic consequences. The Templars were acutely aware of the responsibility they bore. Their order had protected knowledge for centuries, yet even the most disciplined knight could not ignore the danger inherent in predicting and potentially altering the flow of history. They understood that they were in possession of a tool of immense power, one that demanded not only intelligence but integrity and foresight. The leader paused, considering the moral and ethical dimensions. The chamber was more than a classroom or a library. It was a crucible designed to test the wisdom of those who encountered it. Knowledge in this space was inseparable from morality. The Egyptians had created not only a map of the cosmos and human history but also a mirror for the mind and soul. Those who approached it with arrogance, selfishness, or violence would fail. Those who approached it with clarity, respect, and restraint would be guided toward understanding. As the Templars continued to explore, a deeper layer of the chamber revealed itself. Faint inscriptions emerged along the edges of the floor and walls, visible only when certain light patterns aligned with the object's pulses. These inscriptions depicted philosophical and spiritual concepts intertwined with scientific and astronomical principles. Ideas about the nature of reality, the interconnection of life, the cycles of creation and destruction, and the ethical responsibilities of knowledge. The Egyptians had built a holistic system, combining science, philosophy, and morality into a unified framework. The Templars realized they were not simply deciphering history. They were participating in a dialogue across millennia with minds that had understood truths far beyond their time. The chamber seemed to respond to the collective comprehension of the knights. Light intensified along the pathways of understanding. Shadows receded from previously obscured inscriptions, and the object's veins of energy pulsed in resonance with their realization. They began to perceive a subtle rhythm, a cosmic cadence woven into the chamber itself, linking human intention with the cycles of the universe. Every interaction, every careful observation, deepened the connection. The Egyptians had constructed a system that demanded unity of thought, purpose, and ethical awareness. Then came the first truly moral test. One of the knights, driven by curiosity and the desire for personal glory, attempted to manipulate one of the crystalline spheres without proper observation or alignment. Immediately, the object pulsed violently, casting intense shadows that danced across the walls like warning specters. The vibration reverberated through the chamber, and the glow of the veins dimmed in response. The leader intervened swiftly, restoring order, and the chamber gradually returned to its previous state. It was clear. The system was not merely informational, it was responsive, designed to test the character and intentions of those who engaged with it. The Templars realized that the object, the spheres, and the chamber as a whole were a form of ethical and intellectual calibration. The Egyptians had anticipated human curiosity, ambition, and fallibility. They had designed the chamber not only to preserve knowledge but to ensure that only those capable of wisdom, restraint, and ethical discernment could access it safely. Every step forward required not only comprehension but also judgment, discipline, and moral clarity. By the time they paused for a moment of respite, a profound sense of purpose had taken hold. The chamber was no longer simply a mystery to be solved. It was a living lesson, a challenge, and a testament. The Egyptians had built not just a repository of knowledge, but a system capable of shaping minds, guiding actions, and preserving the delicate balance between understanding and responsibility. The Templars were now participants in this ancient design, custodians of a secret that stretched across time, morality, and the cosmos itself. And as the light from the object pulsed faintly in the center of the chamber, reflecting off the crystalline spheres and illuminating the intricate patterns on the walls and floor, they understood that the true journey had only just begun. This was no longer a simple discovery of hidden artifacts. It was a confrontation with the very principles that govern the universe and human society, a challenge that demanded intellect, courage, and an unshakable moral compass. The Egyptians had left them a gift, but also a test. And the outcome, the Templars realized with quiet awe, would resonate far beyond the desert sands. The chamber seemed to hum with a life of its own, its walls alive with shifting shadows and glowing inscriptions that pulsed in harmony with the obsidian object at its center. Every movement the Templars made seemed to ripple through the air, causing the crystalline spheres to refract light into patterns that danced across the floor and walls. This was no longer a passive environment. It was interactive, responsive, and profoundly intelligent. The Egyptians had not merely hidden a relic here. They had created a dynamic interface, a mechanism to guide, test, and educate those deemed worthy of understanding the truths they had encoded. The Templars realized with growing awe that what they were witnessing transcended human craftsmanship. It was a fusion of philosophy, astronomy, and spiritual insight manifested in physical form. Pierre knelt by the nearest sphere, his fingers tracing the delicate curves and veins of light within it. As he moved, the object and spheres responded, lines of illumination connecting previously isolated patterns on the walls and floor. The Templars watched in silent reverence, understanding that the Egyptians had built not just a map, but a living model of the cosmos. A system that integrated celestial motion, human history, and moral consequence. Each line, each symbol, each pulse of light revealed layers of meaning, forming a coherent, interconnected framework that transcended time. The chamber itself was a teacher, and the knights were its students, being guided through lessons that were both intellectual and ethical. The leader stepped forward, placing his hand upon one of the crystalline spheres. Instantly, the object at the center pulsed with increased intensity, and faint projections appeared along the walls, three-dimensional constellations, planetary alignments, and depictions of ancient civilizations in motion. The Templars could see the rise and fall of dynasties, the spread of empires, and the impact of human choices reflected alongside celestial events. It became clear that the Egyptians had encoded predictive models into this chamber, combining astronomy, geometry, and philosophy into a system capable of illustrating the flow of time and consequence. The chamber was a bridge between the heavens and the earth, between knowledge and action, between morality and destiny. A profound sense of responsibility settled over the knights. They understood that this knowledge was not neutral. It could enlighten, guide, or devastate depending on its use. The Egyptians had created a system that demanded ethical discernment as much as intellectual insight. The Templars felt the weight of centuries pressing upon them. They were not merely discovering secrets, they were being tested. Every action within the chamber had consequence. Every gesture carried meaning, and every misstep could compromise the delicate balance the Egyptians had preserved for millennia. As they explored further, the crystalline spheres began to reveal something extraordinary. Encoded within their geometry were patterns suggesting lost technologies, knowledge that could manipulate natural forces with a precision previously unimaginable. Lines of light traced diagrams of mechanisms that could control water flow, harness energy, and even manipulate aspects of matter itself. The Templars realized that the Egyptians had developed practical applications for their understanding of the universe, combining theory, observation, and engineering in ways that far surpassed contemporary capabilities. These spheres were not mere symbols. They were repositories of applied knowledge, hints at technologies lost to time and buried under the sands of history. The implications were staggering. They were not just witnessing a philosophical or spiritual teaching tool. They were observing the remnants of a civilization that had mastered forces the modern world could barely comprehend. The chambers, the object, and the spheres were interconnected, forming a system that preserved knowledge of both the cosmos and the practical mastery of natural laws. It was a treasure of intellect, morality, and science, encoded so carefully that only those capable of insight, patience, and ethical discernment could access it fully. The Templars realized that they were the inheritors of an ancient trust, custodians of knowledge that could shape civilization if properly understood, or destroy it if misused. Pierre, trembling with excitement and fear, pointed out alignments between the spheres and the veins of light in the central object. As he did, projections appeared on the walls depicting complex machines and instruments, showing how celestial knowledge could be translated into practical effect. The Egyptians had not simply studied the stars. They had harnessed the understanding gained from their study to manipulate the world around them, blending science, philosophy, and ethics into a unified system. The chamber was a laboratory, a classroom, and a moral crucible, all at once. The leader realized that the chamber was teaching them a critical lesson. Knowledge without wisdom was dangerous, and understanding without ethics could be catastrophic. The Egyptians had anticipated human curiosity, ambition, and potential folly, designing a system that measured not just comprehension but character. Every pulse of light, every alignment, every reaction of the object was a subtle test, ensuring that only those who approached with clarity of mind and integrity of heart could safely engage with the deeper truths. The chamber was alive in a sense the Templars had never known, aware of their presence, attuned to their intent, and judging their readiness to carry forward its revelations. Hours passed as the Templars studied, traced, and interpreted. The chamber continued to reveal new patterns, new sequences, and deeper layers of encoded knowledge. They began to perceive connections between the spheres, the central object, and the constellations above, realizing that the Egyptians had built a comprehensive system linking human history, moral consequence, celestial mechanics, and applied science. Each revelation was breathtaking, challenging their understanding of reality and the limits of human achievement. The chamber seemed to thrum with an energy that had grown almost palpable, a subtle vibration that resonated in the bones and minds of the Templars. The light from the central object had intensified, casting elongated shadows that intertwined with the glowing lines on the walls and floor. Every pulse, every flicker of illumination, seemed purposeful, as though the chamber itself were aware of the Knights' comprehension and was actively testing the limits of their insight and resolve. The crystalline spheres refracted the light in ways that created patterns too complex to be accidental. Shifting constellations, interlocking geometries, and faint symbols that hovered briefly before dissolving back into the fabric of the chamber. The Templars began to realize with awe and trepidation that this was no passive relic. It was alive in a sense, a mechanism designed to interact with them, to challenge them, and to guide them toward understanding far beyond ordinary human capacity. Pierre, the youngest among them, could barely contain his excitement. He had spent years studying obscure texts and hieroglyphs, yet nothing in his scholarship had prepared him for this interactive marvel. He moved his hand along one of the spheres, and immediately the light patterns shifted in response. The lines on the walls began to animate, forming sequences that depicted not only the alignment of the stars, but also their connection to events in human history, rising and falling empires, shifts in cultural influence, even the ebb and flow of philosophical movements across continents. The Templars could see the Egyptians' intent. This was a living diagram of cause and effect, illustrating how the cosmos and human behavior were intricately intertwined. The leader, ever cautious, stepped forward to place his hand on the central object. The moment he made contact, a low hum reverberated through the chamber, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with intensity. The walls flickered, revealing previously hidden inscriptions and diagrams. Suddenly, a three-dimensional projection rose from the object, hovering in midair. A miniature map of the ancient world, animated with lines of light that traced the movement of armies, the migration of peoples, and the spread of knowledge. The Templars stared, astonished, as the map shifted and morphed, illustrating consequences of decisions made centuries ago and those yet to come. The Egyptians had encoded a predictive system within the object, a way of visualizing the flow of history and its alignment with cosmic forces. One of the older knights, a man schooled in both astronomy and philosophy, pointed out that the projections were interactive. Subtle gestures produced changes in the display, highlighting different cycles, historical correlations, and celestial alignments. The chamber was no longer a repository of passive knowledge. It was a tool, a teaching device, and a test of intellect and moral discernment. Each interaction demanded focus and intentionality. A careless motion might misalign the projection, obscuring critical information or triggering unpredictable responses. The Templars understood the gravity of their responsibility. They were engaging directly with a mechanism that could reveal secrets powerful enough to reshape understanding, society, or even the natural order itself. As they studied the projections, a more unsettling phenomenon occurred. The object began to project sequences depicting possible futures, branching paths of history contingent upon human decisions. The Templars could see multiple scenarios unfold simultaneously: wars avoided or fought, empires flourishing or collapsing, knowledge preserved or lost. The implications were staggering. The Egyptians had encoded not just observation but potentiality, a predictive model that integrated human morality, cosmic alignment, and causality. It was a blueprint of history that required interpretation, ethical judgment, and restraint. The Templars felt a chill. They were no longer observers. They were now participants in a system capable of anticipating consequences far beyond their comprehension. Pierre traced a line of light from one sphere to the central object, and the projections shifted to illustrate the flow of energy between the stars, the earth, and human civilization. It was as though the Egyptians had created a cosmic ledger, charting not only the physical movements of celestial bodies, but also their influence on human affairs. The Templars could see the profound interplay between natural law and human action, and it became clear that the chamber and its artifacts had been designed to cultivate wisdom, restraint, and insight. Knowledge here was inseparable from morality, and the Egyptians had built safeguards to ensure that only those capable of comprehension and ethical awareness could harness it effectively. Suddenly, one of the knights noticed a sequence that depicted a catastrophic event, an alignment of forces that, if mismanaged, could lead to devastation. The image was abstract but unmistakable. Swirling lines of energy converging with human settlements, symbols of imbalance and hubris intertwined with natural cycles. The chamber seemed to respond to their realization. The light pulsed more intensely, shadows stretched longer, and the hum deepened, vibrating through the floor and walls. It was a warning, a demonstration, and a test. The Templars were being shown not only the potential of the knowledge but also its inherent danger. Misuse or misinterpretation could have consequences far beyond what they could imagine. The leader cautioned the group to move deliberately, to observe carefully, and to approach each interaction with clarity of mind and moral focus. Every gesture, every touch, every thought within the chamber carried weight. The Egyptians had constructed a system that measured character, tested wisdom, and demanded responsibility. The chamber was alive in a moral sense, a crucible in which intellect and ethics were inseparably linked. The Templars felt the enormity of their task. They were now the custodians of a mechanism capable of influencing human history, morality, and understanding of the cosmos. Hours passed, yet no one wished to leave. Every new alignment revealed deeper patterns. Every projection suggested additional layers of meaning. The chamber continued to guide them, subtly, yet insistently, teaching them the connection between celestial mechanics, human behavior, and ethical consequence. The Templars were beginning to perceive a rhythm to the chamber itself, a cadence that synchronized thought, action, and understanding. They realized that this was more than a test of intellect. It was a training of the mind, spirit, and moral compass simultaneously. Then came the first truly interactive revelation. The central object's veins of light converged on a single crystalline sphere, and the projection shifted to depict an alignment of cosmic forces that mirrored the chamber itself. Symbols along the walls rearranged into sequences that represented both natural laws and human virtues: courage, wisdom, restraint, and insight. The Egyptians had encoded a system that connected ethical choice to cosmic consequence, showing that knowledge without virtue could destabilize everything. The chamber had settled into a tense, expectant silence, the only sounds being the faint hum of the central object and the subtle shifting of light across the crystalline spheres. The Templars were acutely aware that they were now participants in a system far more sophisticated than anything they had ever encountered. Every pulse of light, every glow along the veins of the obsidian object, seemed deliberate, guiding them toward understanding while simultaneously warning them of the risks of misinterpretation. The air itself felt heavy with anticipation, as though the chamber were waiting for them to unlock yet another layer of knowledge. One that was not only historical or astronomical, but prophetic, a revelation of events hidden in the fabric of time. Pierre leaned closer to one of the spheres, tracing a complex sequence of lines that had previously gone unnoticed. As his fingers moved, the veins of light in the central object responded, intensifying and converging on a particular symbol etched into the floor. The symbol shifted subtly, transforming into a three-dimensional holographic projection that depicted a distant city, its streets, temples, and monuments rendered with incredible detail. Lines of light traced the movement of people and objects through time, suggesting sequences of events yet to occur. The Templars gasped collectively. They were witnessing a prophecy, one that had been encoded centuries earlier by minds capable of perceiving both human history and cosmic cycles. The leader stepped forward, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the object. He had faced battles, betrayals, and the horrors of war, yet the weight of this discovery pressed upon him with an intensity unlike anything he had known. As he touched the object, the projection expanded, revealing connections between the distant city and broader patterns of civilizations, trade routes, and alliances. Symbols previously assumed to be decorative now revealed their true purpose. Each represented a factor in a predictive matrix, a complex system that accounted for human behavior, environmental forces, and celestial alignments. The Egyptians had created not merely a timeline, but a dynamic model capable of illustrating multiple potential futures, contingent upon choices and actions. One of the knights, trained in both astronomy and philosophy, realized the staggering implication. The Egyptians had constructed a predictive mechanism that integrated cosmic knowledge with human morality. The projection depicted the consequences of decisions, highlighting moments where ethical or strategic errors could cascade into larger disasters. The chamber was both a warning and a guide. The Templars felt the enormity of their responsibility settle upon them. They were no longer mere explorers. They were interpreters of a system that could shape the fate of cities, kingdoms, and perhaps entire civilizations. As the Templars studied the projection, subtle vibrations pulsed through the floor, and the object's veins of light began to shift in response to their focus. Hidden symbols along the walls illuminated, revealing text in ancient hieroglyphs interwoven with geometric diagrams. Pierre recognized some of the characters from his studies, yet many were unfamiliar, representing concepts that transcended simple language. These were encoded principles, the Egyptians' attempt to compress complex knowledge, philosophical, astronomical, and moral, into a single interlocking system. The chamber was teaching them not only to see the future, but to understand the conditions that would shape it. The first element of the prophecy revealed itself through a sequence of spheres aligned in a triangular configuration. Each sphere pulsed rhythmically, projecting light along lines that converged at the center of the chamber. The holographic projection now depicted a series of events spanning generations. The rise of a ruler, the fall of a dynasty, and a sudden upheaval of social and political structures. The sequence suggested that these outcomes were not random, but the result of cumulative actions, decisions, and ethical failings or successes over centuries. The Templars could sense the Egyptians' intent. They were being shown a model of cause and effect that demanded careful consideration, wisdom, and restraint. A sudden glow along the edges of the central object drew the leader's attention. He noticed an unusual alignment between the object, the crystalline spheres, and a series of symbols that seemed to indicate intervention points, moments where action or inaction could alter the course of predicted events. The chamber was teaching them something extraordinary. Prophecy was not a passive vision of fate, but a map of potential, influenced by knowledge, ethics, and cosmic alignment. The Egyptians had encoded guidance within the chamber, allowing those with the ability to understand to make informed decisions that could shape outcomes rather than merely observe them. The Templars began to experiment carefully, adjusting the position of one of the spheres and observing the changes in the holographic projection. A sequence of events shifted subtly, revealing alternative outcomes. The chamber responded instantly, light intensifying along new pathways, shadows realigning with the altered projections. This was not mere illusion, it was an active, responsive system, capable of illustrating the interplay between human intention and cosmic law. The Templars felt both awe and fear. The Egyptians had built a mechanism that could reveal not only historical truths, but also the pathways of destiny, contingent upon human action and moral choice. Pierre, his voice barely a whisper, pointed out that the sequence depicted not only political and social events, but also natural phenomena, floods, droughts, celestial anomalies, interwoven with the human narrative. The Egyptians had understood the interconnectedness of natural forces, human society, and ethical responsibility. Every action, every neglect, Every moral choice could cascade through time, producing effects that might be subtle or catastrophic. The chamber was a lesson in consequence, a vivid demonstration of the ripple effect of both human and cosmic actions. The leader felt a chill run through him as he realized the magnitude of what lay before them. This was not simply a discovery of hidden knowledge, it was a confrontation with the mechanisms of fate itself, encoded centuries before their arrival, awaiting those capable of understanding. The Templars had crossed into a domain where intellect, morality, and destiny converged. Each revelation carried weight. Each observation demanded caution, discernment, and ethical awareness. The Egyptians had entrusted them with insight and guidance, but also with the responsibility to interpret and act wisely. Hours passed as they deciphered the first elements of the prophecy, each layer revealing more complex interconnections between cosmic events, human history, and ethical choice. The chamber pulsed in recognition of their comprehension, and faint resonances seemed to echo the rhythms of the spheres and the object itself. The chamber had grown quieter, almost reverent, as if it, too, sensed the gravity of the Templars' engagement with the first prophecy. The central object pulsed steadily, veins of light weaving across its surface in intricate patterns that reflected onto the crystalline spheres. Shadows danced across the walls, forming fleeting shapes that hinted at secrets yet to be revealed. The Templars, still shaken by the first prophecy, knew that the chamber's teachings were far from complete. They had glimpsed only the surface of the Egyptians' foresight, and the next revelation promised to be even more profound, intertwining not just human history and morality, but the hidden currents of power that shaped empires, faiths, and civilizations. Pierre knelt by the eastern sphere, his eyes tracing lines that connected distant stars to historical centers of power. The sphere responded to his gaze, glowing softly and projecting a delicate network of constellations that seemed to pulse with historical resonance. As he followed the lines, the walls began to shimmer, revealing inscriptions and hieroglyphs that had been invisible moments before. These were more than decorative symbols. They depicted forces, both natural and human, that had influenced the course of empires. Wars, plagues, revolutions, and migrations were mapped alongside celestial alignments, suggesting a profound understanding of the interplay between the heavens and human destiny. The leader stepped forward, placing a hand on the central object. The pulse of light intensified, and a three-dimensional projection emerged, illustrating a city-state at its zenith. Streets teemed with people, trade networks stretched across continents, and armies moved in precise formations. The Templars watched in awe as the projection shifted, revealing how subtle choices by rulers and citizens influenced the rise or collapse of power. This was not merely history. It was a demonstration of cause and effect on a scale both grand and intimate. The Egyptians had encoded a system that revealed the hidden mechanics of power, teaching that human ambition, virtue, and folly were inseparable from the broader currents of fate. Suddenly, one of the knights pointed to a cluster of spheres that had begun to glow independently, their light converging to form patterns previously unseen. These spheres projected images of hidden technologies, secret rituals, and methods of influence that had been lost to time. The Egyptians had not only understood the forces that shape civilizations, but they had also encoded knowledge of mechanisms that could manipulate these forces. The Templars realized with a mix of awe and trepidation that this was more than prophecy. It was a guide to understanding the subtle levers of history, the tools by which empires had been built and destroyed. The chamber was revealing the architecture of power itself. Pierre traced a line connecting one of the glowing spheres to the central object, and the projection shifted to illustrate a sequence of events spanning centuries. Religious movements, secret alliances, and covert influences appeared as interconnected nodes, demonstrating the Egyptians' comprehension of hidden networks that influenced the course of human civilization. The Templars saw that the chamber was teaching them not only about events themselves but also about the unseen forces that shaped them, the manipulation of belief, the guidance of knowledge, the subtle interplay of ambition and morality. Every node, every line, every pulse of light conveyed lessons about responsibility, foresight, and ethical engagement. The leader's voice was quiet but firm as he reminded the knights that this knowledge was dangerous. The Egyptians had not built this system for personal gain or conquest. It was designed to educate, test, and guide those capable of wisdom and restraint. The chamber demanded integrity as much as intelligence. Misuse or misinterpretation could have profound consequences, destabilizing not only their order but the societies and empires that this knowledge touched. The Templars felt the weight of centuries pressing upon them. They were no longer mere seekers of secrets. They were stewards of destiny, accountable for the careful handling of knowledge that transcended time. The chamber began to reveal subtle patterns that illustrated the consequences of moral failings on a grand scale. The projection showed rulers making unethical choices, alliances collapsing under betrayal, and entire civilizations faltering due to corruption or hubris. Conversely, virtuous decisions led to stability, prosperity, and the flourishing of knowledge. The Egyptians had encoded ethics directly into the model, showing that power without wisdom or morality inevitably led to collapse. The Templars understood that prophecy in this chamber was not deterministic. It was conditional, contingent upon human choices and the exercise of virtue. Hours passed as the knights carefully explored the second prophecy. Each new sequence presented moral, intellectual, and strategic challenges. The chamber seemed to respond to their comprehension, pulsing in harmony with their understanding and revealing additional layers of insight. The Templars were learning to read the system as a living text, where the alignment of thought, observation, and ethical judgment produced clarity, and where errors could obscure meaning or trigger warnings. They realized that the Egyptians had constructed a teaching device that was both interactive and evaluative, measuring the character of those who engaged with it. Pierre noticed a subtle shift in one projection. A series of lines connecting distant cities and powers suggested potential interventions, moments where deliberate action could alter the course of history. The chamber was not merely showing outcomes. It was illustrating the mechanics of influence, demonstrating that knowledge, intention, and ethical choice could redirect the flow of civilizations. The Templars felt the enormity of what they were witnessing. The Egyptians had encoded a roadmap for understanding power, guiding those with discernment and moral clarity in their use of influence. The leader paused, studying the spheres and their projections. A realization struck him with chilling clarity. The chamber was teaching not only historical causality but strategic foresight. The Egyptians had understood that civilizations rise and fall not merely through force, but through knowledge, timing, and ethical choice. The chamber was a sophisticated training ground for leaders capable of perceiving both the visible and hidden threads of history. The Templars comprehended that they were standing within a crucible of intellect and morality, being tested for their readiness to bear such profound understanding. As the Templars delved deeper into the second prophecy, the chamber revealed another layer: the integration of human networks with celestial alignments. Lines of light traced paths between influential figures, secret societies, and key locations, all aligned with specific stellar configurations. The Egyptians had encoded a system that connected human action with cosmic patterns, demonstrating the interdependence of morality, strategy, and universal law. The Templars saw that influence, foresight, and ethical responsibility were inseparable, and that misuse could have cascading consequences across generations. By the time the first glimmers of dawn reached the chamber's entrance, the Templars had absorbed the full scope of the second prophecy. They understood the mechanics of power, the responsibilities of influence, and the conditional nature of destiny. The Egyptians had built more than a predictive model. They had created a holistic system of understanding, integrating history, morality, and the hidden forces that shaped human society. The chamber was a living testament to foresight, intelligence, and ethical rigor, demanding comprehension, restraint, and courage from all who entered. The weight of this revelation pressed heavily upon the knights. They were no longer merely interpreters of history. They were now custodians of knowledge that spanned human understanding and cosmic principle. Every step forward would require wisdom, discipline, and integrity. The chamber had revealed its secrets gradually, layering insight upon insight, and the Templars recognized that the path ahead would only grow more challenging. Yet with this second prophecy, they had glimpsed the depth of the Egyptians' foresight and the immense responsibility they now bore. The Templars gathered in a tighter circle, the weight of what they had just witnessed pressing upon them with an almost tangible intensity. The chamber had grown darker, the pulsating light from the central object and the crystalline spheres now casting long, intricate shadows that seemed to stretch toward the far corners of the room. Every pulse, every flicker, seemed deliberate, as though the chamber itself were aware of their presence, their comprehension, and their intentions. It was then that a new revelation began to emerge, one that tied the Egyptians' prophetic system not only to human history and cosmic patterns but directly to the Templar order itself. The realization sent a shiver down their spines. This was no longer just a matter of observing history or predicting outcomes. This was a confrontation with their own order, their own legacy, and the responsibilities and dangers that came with it. Pierre approached the eastern sphere, his fingers trembling as he traced the faint veins of light that connected distant symbols on the floor to the central object. As he did, a new projection emerged, one that depicted a hidden archive, a secret chamber within a fortress, and a series of events tied to the Templars' past. The holographic image shifted to reveal moments of triumph, betrayal, and moral compromise within the order itself. The knights watched in stunned silence as their history, often shrouded in secrecy, was illuminated with precision. The decisions, sacrifices, and transgressions that had shaped the Templar legacy were now laid bare, connected intricately to the patterns of human history and cosmic alignment encoded by the Egyptians. The leader stepped forward cautiously, his hand hovering above one of the crystalline spheres. The veins of light responded to his presence, converging on a series of symbols that suggested not only historical events but also hidden rivalries, covert alliances, and unrecorded conflicts. The Egyptians had anticipated the emergence of organizations like the Templars, foreseeing both their potential for good and the dangers of ambition unchecked by ethical restraint. The chamber was revealing that the Templars' rise to power, their influence over kingdoms and commerce, and even their ultimate downfall were all part of a larger, interconnected system, a moral and historical crucible designed to test not only human intellect but the character of those entrusted with knowledge and power. Pierre traced another line of light, and the projection shifted to show secret correspondences, hidden missions, and coded messages that had been exchanged between Templar leaders across Europe. Symbols on the walls glowed softly, highlighting connections between these clandestine activities and broader historical outcomes. Wars averted, conspiracies thwarted, knowledge preserved or lost. The chamber was making clear that the Templars had always been part of a larger historical continuum, their actions intertwined with forces far beyond their immediate perception. The Egyptians had encoded a system that revealed the consequences of ambition, strategy, and moral choice, demonstrating how even the most secretive decisions could ripple across time. The leader's voice was quiet, almost reverent, as he addressed the group. The Egyptians foresaw us. They understood the potential of an order like ours, its capacity for courage, wisdom, and protection, but also for pride, greed, and corruption. They have left us a mirror, reflecting our past, our choices, and the paths that lie ahead. The Templars absorbed his words, realizing that they were being shown not just history, but a moral framework, a system that demanded vigilance, integrity, and foresight. The chamber was teaching them that knowledge without ethical engagement could be as dangerous as ignorance, and that their legacy depended upon their ability to understand and act wisely. Suddenly, a new sequence of projections illuminated the chamber. The Templars watched as shadowy figures emerged from the timelines, interacting with historical events in ways that suggested intervention or sabotage. The Egyptians had encoded warnings about the dangers of betrayal and the vulnerabilities inherent in concentrated power. The projection depicted how secret enemies, both known and unknown, had exploited ambition and ethical lapses to disrupt civilizations and orders like the Templars. The lesson was clear. Vigilance and ethical steadfastness were essential, and even a powerful order could fall if it failed to align action with wisdom. Pierre's hands shook as he adjusted the position of one of the crystalline spheres. Light converged on the central object, revealing patterns that mapped the consequences of past Templar decisions. The projection illustrated not only the immediate outcomes but also their long-term effects on the order's reputation, alliances, and survival. The Egyptian system had incorporated the principle that power, knowledge, and morality were inseparable. Misuse or negligence in any one area could destabilize the whole. The Templars now understood that their order had been both a subject and a participant in a cosmic moral experiment, and that their duty extended beyond preservation of artifacts to the ethical stewardship of influence itself. The leader pointed out subtle alignments between the Chamber's cosmic patterns and the Templars' historical campaigns. Constellations mirrored battlefield strategies, and celestial cycles coincided with the timing of major missions. It was as if the Egyptians had encoded a universal logic into the Order's very operations, suggesting that their rise, successes, and failures were not merely human constructs but elements of a broader, interconnected design. The Templars felt a mix of awe and fear. Their legacy was being revealed as part of a living moral and historical system, one that demanded comprehension, discipline, and ethical courage at every level. As the night wore on, the Chamber continued to reveal deeper connections. The projections began to illustrate the potential for future challenges to the Templar Order, threats from within and without, moral dilemmas, and the consequences of failing to interpret knowledge with care. Every detail, every glowing symbol, and every shifting line of light seemed to emphasize responsibility. The Egyptians had constructed a system that was as much a warning as it was a guide, showing the Knights that history was a delicate balance of wisdom, ethics, and power, and that their actions could tip that balance toward preservation or collapse. Hours turned into what felt like days, but the Templars were consumed by the revelations. They began to see patterns of influence not only in the past but projected into potential futures, illustrating how the Order could navigate challenges, avert disasters, and maintain integrity across generations. The Chamber was teaching them strategy interwoven with morality, foresight balanced by caution, and power constrained by ethical responsibility. Every pulse of light, every alignment of spheres, and every interaction with the central object reinforced the lesson that knowledge alone was insufficient. Only the union of intellect and virtue could ensure survival and positive impact. By the time they paused to rest, the Templars had absorbed the profound implication of this 18th section. The Egyptian prophecies were not merely about distant civilizations or abstract cosmic principles. They were intimately connected to the Templars themselves. Their order, its decisions, its history, and its future were entwined in a moral and historical continuum carefully encoded by a civilization that had mastered knowledge, foresight, and ethics. The Chamber had become both a mirror and a compass, reflecting their past and guiding their potential paths. They understood that every choice they made from this point forward would resonate far beyond their lifetimes, and that the legacy of the Templar Order now rested on their comprehension, discipline, and moral courage. The Chamber's atmosphere had shifted. The Templars could feel it, a subtle tension that pressed against their senses like the weight of centuries. The pulsing light from the central object had taken on a new rhythm, faster, sharper, almost like a heartbeat that resonated through the floor, the walls, and into their very bones. Shadows, long and angular, twisted across the walls in patterns that were difficult to follow, yet impossible to ignore. There was a sense of expectation, of imminent revelation, and an underlying warning that something dormant within the Chamber was about to awaken. The Templars had already uncovered prophecies, the mechanics of power, and connections to their own order. But this, they sensed, would test their courage, perception, and judgment in ways they had never imagined. Pierre moved closer to the northern wall, where faint lines of light began to glow, tracing an intricate geometric pattern that had previously been invisible. The symbols pulsed in response to their attention, almost as if the Chamber recognized their intent and was preparing to respond to their curiosity. When the leader approached the central object and placed a hand upon it, the Chamber responded immediately. Veins of light converged on a previously unnoticed mechanism embedded into the floor, a circular platform, etched with cryptic symbols, that now began to rotate slowly. The Templars exchanged uneasy glances. The Egyptians had anticipated interaction. The Chamber was not merely a passive repository of knowledge. It was a living, responsive system designed to challenge those who dared to engage with it. The platform's rotation caused subtle shifts in the holographic projections surrounding the Templars. Historical sequences and cosmic patterns began to distort and reform, revealing hidden layers of information that had been locked until that precise movement activated the mechanism. The Templars could see encrypted sequences within the previous prophecies, alternative outcomes, warning signs, and consequences of moral failure that had not been apparent before. The Egyptians had concealed these lessons deliberately, revealing them only to those who approached the chamber with attention, patience, and respect for the system's complexity. This was a test not only of intellect, but of discernment, restraint, and the ability to navigate uncertainty. Pierre leaned in to study one of the newly revealed sequences. Light lines traced paths between previously hidden nodes, connecting secret alliances, covert missions, and moments of ethical compromise within the Templar order. The chamber revealed how small decisions, made in secrecy or haste, could reverberate through time, influencing events far beyond immediate perception. The Egyptians had constructed a system that integrated historical knowledge, ethical reasoning, and predictive modeling in a manner that was both sophisticated and morally rigorous. The Templars understood that the mechanism they had activated was not simply a key to additional knowledge, but a crucible, designed to assess their capacity for insight, patience, and ethical judgment. The leader's hand hovered over the central object, studying the newly revealed projections. Veins of light converged and then split in patterns that suggested both guidance and warning. The chamber seemed to respond to their hesitation, intensifying the glow of the symbols and causing the shadows to writhe more dynamically across the walls. It was as if the Egyptians had imbued the chamber with a subtle form of sentience, one that could measure intent and comprehension. Every movement, every thought, and every decision within the chamber now had immediate, observable consequences. The Templars were learning, with a mixture of awe and trepidation, that they were participants in a living, moral, and intellectual system, one that demanded clarity, courage, and ethical integrity. As the mechanism rotated further, the central object projected a series of cryptic warnings in the form of three-dimensional sequences. These were not merely predictive, they were prescriptive. They illustrated paths that had led to collapse, betrayal, and catastrophe, as well as pathways that had led to preservation, wisdom, and lasting influence. Each projection was layered with complexity, intertwining cosmic patterns, human behavior, and ethical decision-making. The Templars could see the Egyptians' intent. They were being taught that knowledge alone was insufficient, and that wisdom, virtue, and foresight were indispensable in navigating both the human and cosmic dimensions of power. Pierre noticed a particularly alarming sequence depicting a moment of betrayal within the Templar order itself. The projection showed subtle manipulations, miscommunications, and the exploitation of human ambition leading to devastating consequences. The light of the chamber intensified, and the shadows grew more vivid, as if emphasizing the weight of the lesson. The Egyptians had encoded moral imperatives directly into the mechanism. The chamber itself functioned as both a teacher and a warning system, showing that hubris, secrecy, or moral weakness could unravel even the most powerful of orders. The Templars felt a shiver of realization. This chamber was a crucible of consequence, and their engagement with it demanded absolute integrity. The leader directed the Knights' attention to another aspect of the mechanism, a series of smaller spheres that had remained dormant until now. When touched, each sphere projected alternative historical timelines, showing how subtle shifts in action or moral choice could alter the course of entire civilizations. Wars might be averted, empires could flourish or collapse, and the fates of millions depended upon comprehension and ethical application. The chamber was revealing the Egyptians' ultimate lesson. Knowledge and foresight were tools, but without wisdom and moral grounding, they were volatile and potentially destructive. Hours passed as the Templars carefully explored the activated mechanism, each interaction revealing new sequences, hidden consequences, and ethical challenges. The chamber seemed to assess their comprehension continuously, revealing information incrementally to ensure that they could integrate lessons thoughtfully rather than being overwhelmed. The Egyptians had designed a system that was as much about character and judgment as it was about intellect. The Templars began to realize that they were participating in an education that transcended time, one that linked the human, the cosmic, and the moral in a single living framework. Suddenly, one of the projections revealed a hidden layer of the chamber itself, a secret compartment beneath the central platform, containing objects and scrolls marked with symbols of immense significance. The mechanism had unlocked access to this final repository, suggesting that the Egyptians had encoded both physical and intellectual safeguards. Only those capable of navigating the chamber's interactive system, demonstrating patience, moral discernment, and intellectual clarity, could access these treasures. The Templars understood the magnitude of what lay before them. They were standing on the threshold of knowledge and power that could transform their order, influence the course of history, and illuminate secrets previously thought lost to time. The chamber's pulsing light softened slightly as the mechanism completed its rotation. The Templars could feel a sense of achievement but also an intensified awareness of responsibility. The Egyptians had constructed not merely a test of intellect, but a living ethical and historical crucible. The lessons were clear. Knowledge must be earned through understanding, integrity, and patience. The Templars were not merely observers. They were participants, accountable for the comprehension and application of the wisdom before them. The hidden mechanism had served its purpose, revealing that the path to understanding was as much about moral discernment as it was about intellectual skill. By the time they paused, the Templars were exhausted but enlightened. The chamber had escalated the stakes, demonstrating that even the most subtle choices carried consequences that rippled through time, affecting both their order and the broader human narrative. They understood now that the Egyptians' design was far more than prophetic or philosophical. It was an interactive moral, historical, and cosmic system, one that required courage, clarity, and ethical vigilance. Every subsequent step would demand these qualities in full measure. The chamber's crystalline spheres rotated in a deliberate rhythm, casting interlocking patterns of light across the walls. The Templars had discovered layers of Egyptian foresight, encoded with warnings and guidance. Each sphere revealed a hidden mechanism, the interconnection of history, morality, and consequence. Pierre approached the central object, tracing the glowing veins across its surface. Symbols shifted subtly under his gaze, forming sequences that illustrated not just events, but the underlying currents of human choice, ambition, and betrayal. The Egyptians had designed these mechanisms to test comprehension, patience, and moral clarity. Every alignment of light revealed a new layer of insight, a revelation about how power and knowledge, when misapplied, could destabilize empires and unravel civilizations. The leader guided the Knights' attention to sequences depicting ethical and strategic crossroads. Past betrayals, unnoticed compromises, and acts of courage flashed in projections, showing how every decision echoed through time. The chamber was teaching them that foresight alone was insufficient. Moral discernment was required to navigate the hidden patterns of influence and consequence. Pierre noticed a particularly troubling projection, a series of cascading events triggered by a single lapse of judgment. It emphasized the fragility of knowledge and the power of even minor ethical failures. The chamber was clear. The Egyptians' hidden mechanisms were both a warning and a guide. Knowledge carried immense responsibility, and the Templars were now custodians of that responsibility. The Knights reflected in silence, realizing the chamber demanded more than observation. They were being prepared to act wisely, courageously, and ethically, safeguarding not only the secrets of the past but the balance of human destiny itself. The chamber's lattice of light and crystal pulsed, revealing an intricate network of ethical and historical connections. Each node represented choices made long ago and the ripples those choices had caused through time. The Templars could see how courage, betrayal, wisdom, and folly intertwined across centuries. Pierre followed a beam connecting a distant node to a familiar event, tracing the subtle patterns of consequence. He realized that every small ethical decision, whether a vow kept, a secret preserved, or a moral compromise avoided, shaped civilizations in ways few could predict. The Egyptians had encoded a profound principle. Knowledge without virtue, foresight without integrity, is meaningless. The leader's voice cut through the reverent silence. This lattice is not merely information. It is a test, a guide, and a warning. Every choice carries weight, and every act of moral courage can change the course of history. As the Knights explored, the projections revealed hidden consequences of human action, failed alliances, betrayed trusts, and moments of courage that preserved wisdom. Shadows and light interplayed, showing potential futures contingent on ethical vigilance. The chamber emphasized interconnectedness. Nothing occurred in isolation, and even the smallest act could reverberate through generations. Pierre and the other Templars understood the enormity of the lesson. The Egyptians had encoded a living map of morality, power, and consequence. The lattice was both a warning and a call to act wisely, courageously, and ethically. The chamber demanded that knowledge be applied responsibly, preparing the knights to safeguard not just secrets, but the future of civilization itself. The central object pulsed rhythmically, drawing the Templars closer to the chamber's ultimate revelation. The Egyptians' final sequences unfolded before them, combining history, morality, and potential futures. Each projection intertwined human choice with cosmic consequence, illustrating how decisions could preserve or destroy civilizations. Pierre traced the glowing lines connecting nodes of past events, betrayals, and acts of courage. He realized the chamber's final teaching: knowledge alone was insufficient. Ethical discernment and deliberate action were essential to navigate the delicate balance encoded into these prophetic sequences. The leader guided the knights' attention to branching paths that depicted their order's potential futures. Some sequences led to preservation, enlightenment, and stability. Others revealed collapse, corruption, and chaos. The chamber emphasized that destiny was not fixed. It responded to wisdom, courage, and moral clarity. As the knights studied the projections, subtle cosmic alignments appeared, linking earthly actions with universal forces. The Egyptians had encoded a lesson on the interdependence of morality, knowledge, and the flow of history. Every choice had consequences, both visible and hidden, and the Templars understood that foresight without virtue was meaningless. Pierre felt a profound responsibility settle in his chest. The chamber had not only revealed secrets and warnings, it had entrusted them with stewardship. They were now guardians of knowledge, morality, and destiny, bound to act wisely and ethically. The final sequences were not predictions of inevitability, but challenges to courage, discernment, and integrity, leaving the knights with a profound sense of purpose that would guide them beyond the chamber and into the unfolding course of history. The chamber pulsed softly, shadows flickering across walls etched with ancient symbols. The Templars stood in awe, their hearts heavy with the revelations they had absorbed. Every pulse of the central object seemed alive, resonating with the lessons of history, prophecy, and morality. They were no longer observers. They had become participants in a continuum of time, entrusted with knowledge that could shape civilizations. Pierre traced the lattice of light connecting past events, moral choices, and cosmic alignments. Each node revealed how courage, betrayal, wisdom, or ethical compromise rippled through history. The Egyptians' message was clear: knowledge without virtue, foresight without ethical clarity, and power without restraint could all lead to catastrophe. The leader's voice carried through the chamber. We have faced trials, seen consequences, and glimpsed the paths of destiny. This knowledge is not for curiosity, it is a responsibility. We are custodians of wisdom and morality, accountable for the echoes of our choices. As the Templars reflected, the chamber's final projection emerged, a vision of their order's potential futures. Some paths preserved knowledge and justice, others fell into hubris, secrecy, and ruin. The choice was theirs. They realized that the Egyptians' ultimate teaching was not prophecy alone, but stewardship, the call to act with courage, virtue, and foresight. The chamber had transformed them. They understood that their duty extended beyond uncovering secrets. It was about guiding history, preserving integrity, and wielding knowledge with moral clarity. As the light dimmed to a gentle pulse, the Templars felt the weight and power of their responsibility settle within them. The chamber's glow softened, casting a serene light across the crystalline spheres. The Templars stood together, contemplating the enormity of the Egyptians' lessons. Knowledge, prophecy, and ethical trial had brought them here, but the final message was unmistakable. Understanding alone was insufficient. Wisdom demanded action. Pierre approached a sphere, and as he traced its patterns, a projection emerged, branching pathways of possible futures. Each choice they might make, however small, had far-reaching consequences. Courage and moral integrity could preserve civilizations. Compromise and hubris could unravel centuries of progress. The Egyptians had left them not a roadmap, but a charge, the ethical application of knowledge. The leader's voice echoed through the chamber. We are entrusted not just with secrets, but with the responsibility to guide history. Knowledge is a tool, morality its compass, and courage the engine that drives action. The Templars observed the projections, nodes of historical consequence, ethical dilemmas, and cosmic alignments intertwined in a delicate web. Every pulse of light reminded them that foresight without integrity was empty. Every shadowed pathway warned that power without virtue could destroy. In that quiet moment, the Templars understood the full weight of their role. The chamber had transformed them from seekers into custodians, from witnesses into stewards. Knowledge, morality, and destiny were now inseparably linked, and their choices would echo through time. The chamber was silent, yet charged with a profound energy. The Templars stood together, absorbing the ultimate lesson. The Egyptians had left them knowledge, yes, but more importantly, responsibility. The fate of civilizations, the preservation of wisdom, and the moral arc of history now rested in their hands. Pierre touched the central sphere, feeling its warmth. Light rippled outward, tracing paths of consequence and illustrating potential futures shaped by their decisions. The chamber was clear. Understanding without action was meaningless. Every choice, guided by courage and ethical clarity, could ripple across generations. The leader spoke, steady and solemn. This is our charge. Knowledge alone is insufficient. We must act with integrity, courage, and foresight. The Egyptians left us a legacy, but it is ours to honor through action. The Templars absorbed the final projection. Their order, intertwined with history and destiny, facing outcomes of success or ruin based on moral vigilance. Shadows depicted consequences of betrayal, hubris, and compromise, while light illuminated the paths of wisdom, courage, and preservation. They realized the chamber's gift. Foresight was not merely to be seen, but to be applied. The Egyptians had entrusted them with stewardship of knowledge, morality, and destiny itself. As the light faded, the Templars turned, leaving the chamber behind, forever changed, burdened, and empowered to guide history with unwavering ethical resolve.